I think we're live. Okay, we'll wait for John to come back.
Hey, Doc, good to see you. I like your New Year's.
Oh, thanks.
Well, okay, I think we're live. Let me should we wait? I suppose so.
Just
You can start.
What's up, Dominic? Good to see you. Oh,
I know.
Everybody knows.
Okay.
I look like a
Yeah,
baby.
you waited
again.
back.
I shouldn't run like a thing.
Okay, we're just gonna wait till we're live, but we can wait to begin once Doc comes back.
Somebody warm up the crowd.
Yeah,
Just got up.
yeah. I don't know if you realize we're live. It's okay.
Happy New Year.
Oh yeah, Happy New Year. The first.
I got the date wrong in the email.
It's okay.
It's 21. I put 1/4/24.
You're living in the past. Come into the future.
I'm sorry.
I didn't know.
2025.
I saw the topic of discussion. Listen,
That's the important
That
part.
is the only part I scrolled down.
And the stream.
It's people's New Year's resolution. No, the
Get more sleep.
learn more Spanish.
learn how to drive.
End of the year, Baldwin wouldn't shoe well.
Oh,
Try to read every day.
is that good?
Be more patient with the kids.
What? You have to do that?
Okay,
I thought you
we're live, but we waited for you to come back from the restroom.
What did you have to say where I was?
There's only so many corners in this church.
Could have been anywhere. Yeah.
But okay, good morning, and also Happy New Year to all of my friends in the room and who are listening to the live stream. So this is pretty special. It's our first free school of the new year, 2025. And it will be one of our last free schools as we wind down the Year of James Baldwin, which we started last February of 2024. But actually we started the planning in the fall of 2023. So it's been a year and a half. And when so today me and Serafina and I are going to kind of talk about the first 10 months of the year James Baldwin, and begin kind of a discussion on assessing the year James Baldwin, the first 10 months, and then what the next 7 weeks will look like to wind down the year of James Baldwin. And then after that, Doc will have some remarks on an all humanity struggle of a new type in this moment of civilizational crisis, which I think builds especially on last week's free school, and this discussion of an all humanity struggle. But yeah, when Doc asked Serafina and I to help talk about assessing the year of James Baldwin, I was pretty stressed because in some ways I was avoiding thinking about just how much we had done. And not really the events in of themselves, which were a lot. The events, the reading groups, we also did the podcast, we were publishing avant-garde, we were writing. But I think there was a lot that we discussed every free school as well that is intertwined with the year James Baldwin. And I think looking back this week, when I was reflecting on the year James Baldwin, there were many ideas that I think we crystallized through the year James Baldwin. Not just because we were celebrating James Baldwin's 100th birthday the way he deserved to be celebrated as a theorist of crisis and also as a revolutionary thinker, but also because 2024 was a year where the genocide in Gaza was still happening. It was clear that this was a civilizational war. It was clear that even in America, that the state, we talked about how every state is in defense of a civilization, hence every war in this time is also a civilizational war. That of the Israeli state, it's a civilizational war. Netanyahu himself talked about how the war is in defense of Western civilization. Now, where there are even discussions of what's happening in Gaza and the crisis in Israel, as like if Israel cannot win, then it means that Western civilization cannot win. People even are framing the student protests of not just genocide in Gaza, but student rebellions as an attack on Western civilization and seen as a failure at both the institutions of and the foundational values of Western civilization. So that's just one piece of 2024. And then, of course, the deepening crisis in America, the presidential election, there was the assassination attempt on Trump, then Joe Biden said he was not going to run after all, Kamala Harris came in. And then, of course, as we saw, like we spent so much time like led by Doc and Free School talking about what the election really meant, that the election is not like just a messaging problem of the Democratic Party, but actually, in fact, it's the American people on whole, not just angry with, upset with, and disappointed in, but in some ways rejecting the rule and the governance of the current ruling class. And so the question is both, can this be defined as a pre-revolutionary period at this point, more than a civil war? And also, like, what must the people do? What is the capacity of the people to take state power? And okay, so this is also framing the Year of James Baldwin. And Serafina and I are going to kind of make sense of what we've done in the Year of James Baldwin and what we achieved in the ideological struggle with the people of Philadelphia. But first, we wanted to do an overview of all the different events and how it all pieced together the Year of James Baldwin thus far. And hopefully it will let us also enter the next 7 weeks, the last weeks of the Year of James Baldwin, and think about 2025 and where Free School goes from here. Especially like, as we've been discussing, in the middle of us defining the crisis as specifically a crisis of the ruling class that cannot rule, something unseen in American history. And should be seen as such in order to see this as a pre-revolutionary or revolutionary moment rather than a moment of despair or cynicism. So back to February of 2024, so almost a year ago, we inaugurated the Year of James Baldwin, the Year of James Baldwin, God's Revolutionary Voice. And, we had this inauguration at Parkway Central, the Central Library of Philadelphia, where we made it our goal, and we had this great vision statement where we made it kind of a central tenet to define James Baldwin as a revolutionary in particular, to put him back in the freedom struggle that he came out of, saw himself in, and as a witness to, and this word witness was very important to us. And another thing that is important to raise up is we dedicated the Year of James Baldwin to the immortal Palestinian children of Gaza. And what the children of Gaza and their bravery and their courage showed us and the American people and the responsibility of the American people to be a part of humanity rather than insist on being separate from humanity. And as part of the inauguration, we showed a 30-minute compilation that later became, which later I think led to us creating a 1-hour actual documentary defining Baldwin as a revolutionary. We'll talk about that documentary later. But we also had a panel with Michael Muhammad, Doc, Nuri, and Nate Kleiman, who was a member of Jewish Voice for Peace, who talked really beautifully about how he, as a Jewish American, saw that what Israel is doing in Zionism itself as an ideology is a stain upon the Jewish people. And he raised the question of what defines a people? Is it a certain narrative like Zionism, or is it perhaps a moral choice? At this point, can you say to the Jewish people there is a moral choice that must be made, defined not in of themselves as Jewish people, but what they do to humanity or do seems to separate from or part of humanity. And we had a conversation about the American revolutionary process, Baldwin's role, how Baldwin plays a unique contribution. And I think looking back, it was so very important that we were declaring the year of James Baldwin and laying out this ambitious vision of the free school, seeing ourselves as part of an emerging potential people's movement for freedom that we were trying to expand through the ideological struggle. I feel like in some ways that's what we were declaring with this vision of we're going to be doing events, concerts, intercivilizational concerts, art exhibits, as well as this podcast where we would speak to Baldwin, Philadelphia would speak to Baldwin, and Baldwin would speak back to Philadelphia. And then we also made it a goal to be publishing Avant-Garde, this journal for peace, this journal for science, peace, and democracy over the past year. And which is a large feat. So coming from February, then our next event was just 2 months later, April 4th and 6th, where we specifically said, especially in the context of a deepening crisis and war in Israel, in Palestine by Israel. We had an event that we titled America's Revolutionary Future and Martin Luther King Jr.'s Vision for Peace, where we commemorated Martin Luther King Jr.'s Beyond Vietnam, a time to break silence speech, back on April 4th, 1967. And it was important because we specifically wanted to lift up, in some ways, a task that is yet to be achieved or continued by the American people. The way that King defined, we as a people can either be on the right side of world history, the barefoot peoples of the world are already moving, walking forward. We have a choice to be on the right side of world revolution or else doom ourselves to spiritual death, which is the way we're going because of war. And the way he talked about what we must undergo is a radical revolution of values, which I think in some ways we gave new meaning to the year of James Baldwin, especially in our recent discussions of the state, how we defined the way we defined that actually the issue is this white supremacist social system, not a political economy, but a white supremacist social system. And like a radical revolution calls upon the individual human being to make a moral and hence revolutionary choice as part of a radical revolution of values, to not just change the political economy, but in fact change what life itself must mean. And thus how society is organized, human relationships are organized, like how the economy must be oriented around or organized by. But this is me kind of making sense of some of what we were trying to get at with like us commemorating that April event. So we played the whole speech in full at the First Unitarian Church, which is where Martin Luther King Jr. first heard of Gandhi and nonviolence from Mordecai Johnson. And it was very important that we were listening to King's words in the very same church where King first heard of nonviolence and of Gandhi, and was forever changed. And we also dedicated that event to Viola Liuzzo, Reverend James Reeb, who were both Unitarians, and paid the ultimate price because they so believed in this radical revolution of values that King and the civil rights movement put forth so clearly to the American people to make it easier to make that choice, to make that moral choice. And then we also dedicated that event to Aaron Bushnell, who was, I think, he was the former military service member who set himself on fire in protest of the Israeli state, which we in Free School defined as not just a white supremacist, not just a Zionist state, but a white supremacist state, an extension of the white supremacist social system in America. Then, as part of commemorating King's Beyond Vietnam speech, and its relevance today, we also, I think maybe we take it for granted now, but we, for the first time, were in Zion Baptist Church, which is the very historic church of the civil rights movement led by Reverend Leon Sullivan. And it's the church that Doc was baptized in. And so it was very emotional to come back to also the place that not just meant so much to Black people in Philadelphia, but also helped in some ways did raise, this man, this thinker who like we all in some ways see ourselves as coming from as well. So it was very moving to come back to Zion Baptist Church, that beautiful sanctuary. And the way that the congregation at Zion Baptist Church, it was not foreign at all for them, for us to be there, but actually it was very much an embrace of, yes, like, please, let's talk about something positive for especially the youth and children, something that the youth and children need, which is ideas for the future, the belief that there is a future to fight for. And actually James Baldwin is a perfect touchstone to, like, in Baldwin's words, like, strike water from that rock, which is our inheritance. And so we had a panel titled "A Generation Prepared to Pay Its Dues to the Future," which I think is kind of funny because in some ways I think that's a discussion we have yet to fully like go deeper into that we need to, right? In some ways it's coming back in the reading groups, the literacy campaign. It's kind of funny revisiting our titles and the ideas because we come full circle to them and give it new meaning later in the year as we ourselves also have changed and like have to meet the people more. And then just so we don't forget, we had a mini intercivilizational concert with the beautiful Cambodian dancers, with the Korean drumming, the Korean children who were doing traditional drumming. And then Alfie Pollitt performed, as well as Bobby Zankel's wonderful staff performed. Okay, so that's just our second event. Also, let me know if you need me to move faster. I'm gonna pull a doc and be like, okay, maybe I should move a little faster. Now I know why you say that every time, but our next event was June 1st and June 2nd, titled "The Crisis of Knowledge in the American University." James Baldwin and the Struggle for Our Human Future. And I just wanted to list the panel titles because I think they're very meaningful and important. I think in the Year of James Baldwin, the science conference was an important watershed moment for us. I think it's where we defined in tasks for ourselves the specificity of defining Baldwin as a revolutionary, especially with the understanding of a counter-revolution and betrayal of knowledge that occurred after the Civil Rights Movement. Defining that there's the problem is not just capitalism, but a crisis of knowledge itself, which is perhaps can be more suffocating to the young generation. Like it's than just like that is more suffocating than just saying like there is like material problems, but to say that there's a crisis of knowledge that also convinces the young generation that there is no purpose or no future to fight for. And the panels were titled, the first was "The University as an Arm of the State, Zionism, the War Economy, and the Consequences for Knowledge." The second panel was titled "Knowledge, Theory, and Ideology in the Black Freedom Tradition." The third was "Counter-Revolution Against Knowledge, Postmodernism, Identity Politics, and Pessimism." Which in some ways I think we also have gotten a lot from our the reading groups recently of how important this counter-revolution against knowledge, and specifically postmodernism, identity politics, and pessimism. And I think now looking back, we could add the specificity of queer theory in there with postmodernism. Okay, the fourth panel was "The Revolutionary Philosophy of James Baldwin and the Path Toward the Human Future." Specifically, I wanted to raise up, at least for me, more than even the presentations, I really remember the roundtable where we talked about the Du Bois-Baldwin synthesis, which we later discussed as a Du Bois-Baldwin complementarity. I think Serafina and I are going to go more into that in our assessment of ideologically how I think that defines the free school, but also how it defines, I think, like, in some ways, how I think it defines something important for the American people moving forward. Why I think the Du Bois-Baldwin complementarity, or Doc's concept of that Baldwin and Du Bois are the mountain upon which we fight, is so significant.
Yes.
Okay, so that was the science conference, June. We're in June. So, okay, so now we're moving on to our next event, which is Baldwin's birthday, August 2nd, 3rd, and 5th. Like this one was, I think you're getting the sense of the momentum, just how much free school expands our capacity. Baldwin's birthday, I think, was really the height of the year in terms of events. It was also our last like large event. It was 3 days, and each day was very significant and a large event in of itself. And the first day was the screening of Free School's original documentary, To Fulfill the Unfulfilled, To Answer the Unanswered, The Revolutionary James Arthur Baldwin. It's hard to explain how significant it is to make a documentary, not even the like aesthetic of a documentary, but how ideological both art and something like this documentary is. In order to make the documentary, it required Free School, and especially Doc, like I put a lot in your name, but it requires a lot. We essentially had to task ourselves with the question of, it's not enough to just say James Baldwin is a revolutionary thinker. Why? What makes him a revolutionary? Like, especially with our understanding of there is such thing as an American revolutionary process. Right. What makes Baldwin a revolutionary thinker so urgent for today? And we defined it by the two questions in the documentary. Why, in spite of a long history of revolutionary struggle and theory, we're even considering European, the workers' movements, Marxism, Leninism. Why, in spite of a long history of revolutionary struggle and theory, are there still these unanswered questions of Black people are not yet free? And then second question, has white modernity and capitalism emancipated white people, let alone the world's dark billions? I think these were very defining. Like these were huge defining, both political and I would say philosophical questions that open up, it opens up a lot of oxygen for us to understand, in some ways both our inheritance, but also our task for the future. We had this documentary screening and a panel discussion. I think in some ways, after this documentary screening, we had a lot of other documentary screenings in different venues. We had them in our different reading groups. We used the Blackwell Library. We had one at Zion Baptist Church. We also did a documentary screening at the Nation of Islam, Mosque number 12. And, in Chicago, yeah. And I think, in some ways, I think there's an art to also discussing the documentary too. The documentary, I think, is such an important ideological tool in many complex ways that I didn't understand until you actually put the documentary in front of the people, especially in different cities. Not just what it does in your mind up here, but also what it does to your heart and the memory. And the way I described it, especially after Zion Baptist Church, was you kind of, even on a visceral level, at least as a young person, you realize that someone loved you. You realize that someone loved you. They hadn't met you, but that someone loved you. Many people loved you. And once you realize that someone loved you, and actually the only reason why we even have a world still, or a country still, or a city still, or people still, is out of love. Is out of, how Baldwin says, the act of love of very few people. And once you realize that, it kind of puts the question of the revolutionary or moral choice of, well, what are you going to do with that love? Are you going to just take it for granted and let it sit? Or will you make the moral choice to do something with it for then the generation long after, just like knowing someone loved me? And I think that's important, actually. So, okay, that was the documentary screen. Day 2 was our very ambitious Afro-Asiatic peace concert. The whole day at this Church of the Crucifixion. Same with the documentary screening. This is also when we came back to the Church of the Crucifixion. I think the locations really matter, that we were doing all these events at public institutions like the Free Library, at all these different churches with significant Zion Baptist Church, a huge, important intellectual church of the Black proletariat, played such an important role in the civil rights movement. The Church of the Crucifixion, an Episcopal church that was in the historic seventh ward of Philadelphia, which, you know, looks very rich and nice now, but really was where the Black working class and the Black poor lived. Like I think in the 1800s, early 1900s, and Du Bois studied for the Philadelphia Negro, and he himself studied this church, the Church of the Crucifixion. So we came back to the Church of the Crucifixion because of Madre Jessie's generosity, and we had our documentary screening here, we had our Afro-Asiatic Peace concert here, and we had like many different performers. And it was very important that we brought the Tahimba African drumming collective here, Bobby Zankel's wonderful sound. We had traditional Chinese opera, we had traditional Indian dancing, we had a new traditional Korean dancing group. We also brought a Palestinian family who performed, like the daughter, Beirut, performed an opera, a Puccini opera that is, I think about, it's like an aria from a mother's perspective that she changed to be about the plight of Palestinian mothers. And we also had Alfie Pollett perform with Jaleel Shaw, and Serafina performed, Osiris Wildfire performed like folk music, and I think I'm missing some. I might have missed some, but it's hard to actually describe how special that concert was. And like we'll talk about it in our assessment too, but it also, the documentary and also the Afro-Asiatic Peace concert, I think were some of the most difficult events to put together, but I think were important because not just because of like our discussions of why we're doing XYZ, but actually because I think the Year of Baldwin showed that this is the time for philosophy. And one of the greatest expressions of philosophy is art and music, I think. And I think also it's significant, I don't want us to forget the concept of an Afro-Asiatic reconstitution of the people, because we made it a choice to talk about Afro-Asiatic peace concert with the belief that in some ways America's task is to rejoin humanity, to become Black. Like, and if people feel uncomfortable with the term become Black, it means to become human, to become complete. And the only path to become human and complete is through the Black tradition, the Black struggle, like keyword struggle, to struggle for something, to not just be like, I'm me, that's it. So we had this really beautiful Afro-Asiatic peace concert. The room was full, the energy was really beautiful. And in a lot of ways, what you saw was that the people of Philadelphia are seeking not just ideas, but also seeking community, which is another word for love. Like they're seeking love. And it's just very beautiful to do that concert in the name of James Baldwin, in the name of James Baldwin, to celebrate his birthday. Okay, so documentary screening. Oh yeah, another thing about that documentary screening, which I'm sure other people bring up, is a big part of the documentary was the soundtrack. The soundtrack was as much of an ideological part of the documentary as the narration, the words themselves, or the imagery. And I think that's significant. That the music itself not just describes a historical moment or memory, but it describes both a tradition and a philosophic assumption of your belief in humanity, like the music itself, the way it's created, what it can describe. And it was interesting that for us, there was something about certain like jazz, but also a specificity of certain jazz musicians like Max Roach, Archie Shepp, that best described certain philosophic ideas like modernity, like has modernity freed white people alone, the Dark Millions, or like like those philosophical questions were best described by something like jazz. Whereas once you reach the place of love, you have to go to rhythm and blues. Like there's something very special about being able to use like holy, holy, or Aretha Franklin says like, we need to come together because together we can shake the earth's foundations. Or like Stevie Wonder's Love's in Need of Love Today. Or, you know, there's just, I think that's also when we really had this explicit discussion of, there's something about the music that I think has to be taken seriously as philosophy for the future. And I think like we're continuing on that. Okay, so that was day 2 of Baldwin's birthday. Day 3 was, again, another like huge event. Like we were splitting up free school into multiple groups to be able to do all of it. it was the art exhibit at the Free Library. That was also so, I'm saying this too much, but that was also very special. And if you've never been to the central branch of the Free Library, the two cases we took are on the second floor. Like the Free Library itself is actually very beautiful, architecture very beautiful. I'm not sure the architectural style, but you enter the lobby, and I think it's marble, but it's tall ceilings and big pillars, and it's just very beautiful. And we first to officially unveil this public exhibit, which we titled Love and Revolution, James Baldwin Speaks to Our Time. We had this very short but very nice concert in the lobby, and it's kind of, maybe I'm too symbolic, but it's just, to me, it was very moving to take up the lobby where we're not hidden in a room, but it's like, this belongs to the people of Philadelphia, and the people of Philadelphia belong with James Baldwin. And Tahimba performed again, and Osiris performed. And there's something really nice about, in the Free Library, you have a lot of people who are just hanging out there who came and attended the event. And you had families with children who were there, and then you had maybe homeless people there, and you also had just people who decided, like, hey, it's free, let me come. And like, there's just a reverence and respect for the ideas. That there is this, like, I feel like over and over what's asserted is that what the people are looking for, what they respect, are ideas and people who defend like moral ideas and revolutionary ideas. And so after this concert, we walked up the stairs to the art exhibit, and we did a guided tour of this wonderful art exhibit. And I wish Nuri and Kathy are here, but maybe Blaze and Shimbarto and Serafina can like also talk about the art exhibit. But I think we basically divided it into two. The two cases are divided by, like, in some ways, from whence Baldwin came. Like, that Baldwin, you can't see Baldwin as just being born in 1929. I forget his date of birth. 1924? 1924. Oh, yeah. Sorry. 1924. But that actually he himself, he saw himself as being a Southerner born in the North. And then also him seeing himself basically like my life, but also Americans' lives. They don't realize it came from the Middle Passage. We're all defined by the Middle Passage. We're defined by the inconvenient reality of that dark stranger who we malign so much. And so that first case is very much about like Baldwin, from whence he came, the church, his autobiography, and how it's an autobiography of the American people. And the second case was dedicated to the Black freedom struggle. Not just King and all those ordinary people who were part of this movement, Black and white, who were part of this movement, but also even the Black Panther Party, like the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, how in that moment what you have is a revolutionary moment where all Black people are saying, I cannot wait for freedom any longer. And we must act. Like, we're going to act. The question is whether the American people will also act, or else the damage will be maximized. Like, the whole idea of, and then also asserting that the Black freedom struggle was a third American revolution that forever changed America, and Baldwin is a witness to that, and a part of that comes from that. And that's how you must like look at his life, and also must look at his thinking and works. Like, you can't separate him from that. And to do that is to misunderstand Baldwin, and to also misunderstand his ideas. Okay, we're almost to the end of the actual events. Quickly, like, I need to add these events because it is insignificant, but August, we had the virtual event that Jahan and Meghna led on the DNC. And I forget the title, but it was a 2-day virtual event deliberately discussing the DNC and how James Baldwin's words described the crisis as more of a crisis of the state and a crisis of the people achieving people's democracy, versus just like it just being a simple thing of like, oh, the Democratic Party failed its base, and like using docs where the question is, was the working class ever the Democrats' base? And when did that change? Like, this party is not the party of FDR. Like, there has already been a counter-revolution that defined also the Democratic Party as aligning with the ruling class's agenda. of war, of poverty. Okay, October, we had a documentary screening at Mosque number 12. That was really important. Like, it was the first time we've ever had an event actually at Muhammad Mosque number 12, which is open to the community. And so like, and it's hard to state how important that is to be allowed into that space like that with open arms. And also like, they were so generous helping us with the tech, and such an appreciation for also the ideas, the tribute we were playing to Baldwin as a revolutionary Black man, as a revolutionary the way he defined himself. And then we had this like beautiful panel where it was really moving in particular to hear certain brothers of the Nation of Islam talk about their own lives, connecting their autobiography to Baldwin. This is also where, just to remind you, like this is also where in Free School we started talking about that there isn't just something called poverty, there's something called Black poverty, where there's a whole section of society deliberately carved to be set up for failure. It doesn't matter how much genius a Black child has, they will never become, it's not meant for them to become the next Oprah. In fact, Oprah functions to make you believe that you should like leave the community rather than free your people. And so that's when we also talk about if there is something called Black poverty, almost like that there's a deliberate poverty, a deliberate suppression of a whole people since like childhood, basically, then that means there must be a social system with a set of laws, a state, and many different like the economy, many different tools. There must be a whole social system upholding white supremacy, functioning. And in some ways, we were saying like, and it's required to have something called Black poverty and to separate Black people from society unprotected the way other people have rights protected by society. There must be a social system. And the reason why it's so important to define that is because we're defining that, in fact, the revolutionary process in America is not about just changing the political economy. It's about changing a whole social system that affects the way we even, our human relationships to one another, or even our relationship to ourselves. Like our relationship to ourselves is mediated by this organizing principle of white supremacy. And I think that's a conversation I think that is also an idea that we are still defining and carrying forward. But that was, I remember, a very important moment in the year of Baldwin and Free School as well. Okay, so I'm getting kind of hot, but so November, the election, that's, after the election is also when in Chicago, we did a documentary screening and celebrated James Baldwin's 100th birthday at the Harold Washington Library, which is, if you think the Central Library of Philadelphia is nice, wait till you go to Harold Washington Library. It's like, I don't even know, what, 12 floors? Something like 10 floors. This huge, tall building, like literally like 3 blocks long, something like, it takes up like 2 blocks, 3 blocks. It's like a 2-by-2 block building. And it was built because of Harold Washington, this mayor who broke the Chicago political machine. And it was supposed to be a palace for the people. And actually to this day, I do think the library systems are different. At the Harold Washington Library, I do think the people of Chicago's relationship to institutions is somewhat different because of what Harold Washington did for the city of Chicago. People still go to that library to just, not for social services, but to actually just read or hang out because it's theirs. I don't think it's the same with the Free Library of Philadelphia. In some ways, the Free Library of Philadelphia is still working really hard to be like, please come, like, we are here for you. They're trying to cater to the people rather than lift up, like, no, this is for you because knowledge is for you. And I think at Harold Washington Library, I do think it's kind of, you get the sense it's different because the people who came to the event were in that library, would I say are the Black proletariat, like Black working people, ordinary people of Chicago. And they were like, had no inhibitions to just say what they want to say, which is like, Doc was like, why isn't Harold Washington Library named after this great mayor who himself declared a James Baldwin Day in Chicago? Why was this event not already being planned? Why has this library in the city not done more to celebrate James Baldwin? What does that show about the control or deliberate attack on the people ideologically to destroy a certain memory and destroy James Baldwin's legacy in his life. And then of course we talked about the election of like, what is the urgency of the American people to see themselves as capable and in fact responsible for uniting for freedom? And then what are the obstacles to it? And we talked about the urgency of like, there is no room for the vocabulary for the word wait. There is no waiting. The crisis has already come. Why is it that we cannot recognize the crisis for what it is and recognize it as a potential pre-revolutionary period for what it is? Why? And you just there's someone in the audience who just straight up said, like, was like, I don't like this idea that there are like he basically was like, I don't believe, I think it's negating, or I think it's like wiping away the responsibility of something called the ruling class, including Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, to just assume that there are some people in the background pushing levers, where he was like, it's not enough to just say that like, oh, well, there are people pushing buttons in the back, so all we can do is like take care of us. He was like, someone in the audience was just straight up just like, I believe that why is it that we're still kind of saying, like, why are we not talking about what the people can and must do to act now? That like, we do not have to just be satisfied with the current choices. We're clearly not. Most of the American people are not. And so why are we still kind of not just saying straight up that the Democratic Party is upholding a ruling class agenda that is anti-people, anti-human being? Because, this was before the election, so I think people were still trying to make Donald Trump into a certain boogeyman in order to say Kamala Harris is not terrible, but like she's still better. But anyways, people can add on to the conversation in Chicago. Okay, lastly, from that point on, I just wanted to emphasize that we didn't really do large events, but instead we really immersed ourselves in a disciplined way, ideologically and politically, into our reading groups. This is also when we started a bunch of new reading groups. Zion Baptist Church, we had a reading group every week, and then also at Lucy and Blackwell Library, which is on 52nd Street in West Philly. So we were doing, and I think we discussed it a little bit, but I really think the literacy campaign and the reading groups in the Year of James Baldwin, it was not just like us doing drive-by reading groups. It was very much an engagement with, I feel like it took a new tone, especially after the election, and through like changing our pedagogy, where we made it a point, I think, to really get to the philosophical, which are the existential questions of the people. And what I mean by that is that it's not just about, do you see the civil rights movement as your inheritance? It goes into even the questions of, why is it that people are more prepared to be pessimistic and seek different routes of escape, rather than why is that easier than it is to say like, to feel a deep yearning or desire to know other people, even to know the truth, to know other people, and thus believe both in the capacity for human beings to change, and also like your role in increasing the possibilities for people to change, and thus like, a revolution essentially. We ask the questions of, is freedom possible? Like, is freedom possible? Do you think all human beings can change? Or do you believe, for example, white people, they're born with the inherent ability not to change. Certain people are born with different, or is in fact that historically constituted through struggle. Historically constituted through, like, people are historically constituted, which is another way of, in my words, saying, are constituted through a struggle of ideas, like, are like, a struggle of, just like people are just not born with different magical abilities. I'm just gonna say that, like, and there's nothing about you biologically that necessarily like makes you able to do X, Y, Z, except the only thing that we're all born with is like love in some ways, love. Or if you want to say like whatever makes us human being is actually both the human striving to know yourself, to know other people, and the yearning to be complete, to be in community. And I think the reading groups have really been what we've been focusing on these past months. And I think in some ways we should take it as far as we can for the next 7 weeks, because I think I think in some ways I'm always hard on myself and us, but I think I wish we had done it more in the beginning of the year. But in some ways, I think we're also putting a lot of our capacity into the events and like working out certain ideas, which are harder than I think a lot of people give credit for. Ideas are not easy. It's not just sitting in a room and thinking. Like, it's not like that, because there's no pre-formula. This is, it's a matter of life and death. It's a matter of my own. It's even a matter of my own life and my purpose. It's a matter of like, what is revolution? Why revolution? Like, why do I even care? Well, because I care about human beings. Like, if I don't care about human beings, then we should all just shoot ourselves. Go Jim Jones Kool-Aid. Although I know he's misunderstood, but I know Jim Jones is misunderstood. But so I think the next 7 weeks, the other last thing I want to say before I'll turn to Serafina, we can both engage in an assessment, because we have some ideas we wanted to like lift up again, which is that I think the reading groups have shown us, to me, I think, but I'm also like an optimist, is I actually think the reading groups, despite disappointments, one, it's clarified certain philosophical and existential questions that must be confronted before we can even reach the point of like, let's organize ourselves. It's the philosophical question that I laid out, which is like, do you believe that there is a future? Do you believe that there should be a future? Do you believe that human beings can change? Do you think human beings can love? Like, the one poll number I did like from that article I talked to you about, Doc, that you didn't like, is I really actually liked a specific poll number about youth, which is that young people are shown to be, more than any other age group, the most distrustful of not just interpersonal relationships, but also institutions, including the federal government. I think that's actually kind of interesting. Like, it's why you get a Luigi Mangione. Like, he didn't just do what he did because he felt like shooting someone. It comes from a certain ideological place of like, I expected something from society, and the society is corrupt, and I realize that it's corrupt. The best I can do is to be a martyr, like Joan of Arc style. Like, the best I can do is to like be a martyr, to do an individual act of violence. And you're seeing more of that. I mean, it's the same thing with the, like, I guess we don't know the truth, but the guy in the Cybertruck outside of Trump's Las Vegas building, where he like wrote, I guess he released a manifesto, I don't know how much to believe, but he basically said like, I am doing this because the only thing Americans pay attention to is violence. Yeah. And so I'm gonna use violence, an individual act of violence, to make it a point to say that we're fucked. Like, this society is in collapse. And I want it to be a wake-up call for America. And I think, and I think what the reading groups have shown is that people are hungry. I do think that people are already prepared to ask questions that are actually revolutionary, can be revolutionary questions if we make them revolutionary questions. They're existential philosophical questions which have revolutionary implications. And I think Baldwin, and I think this goes into the assessment. This is really the last thing I'll say, which is, I actually think at this point I feel comfortable saying that, especially around free schools discussions of modernity, is that I think we can say that Du Bois and Baldwin together as two specific thinkers are thinkers of modernity. And I think, in fact, their contribution to the long arc of human development and human thought and human life, like the human concept of what is life and life itself, I think they can be placed like in the constellation of all of that, right next to like the ancient thinkers of Buddha and Confucius and Socrates, and I guess maybe the Enlightenment. But I don't know. I feel like I'm not totally understanding the role of Enlightenment yet, but I definitely think their contribution to the future of humanity, not just America, but to human thought itself, a reconciliation of how do you connect the individual life and the agency and the creativity of the individual human being to this larger concept of truth, of like the absolute truth, like the absolute concepts of like truth and humanity itself and the purpose of life and the meaning of life. I think they help reconcile those two seemingly at odds concepts through struggle, through basically the task of like revolutionary struggle, and a struggle imbued with love. And I think we're still working that out. But I just want to say that I think the Year of Baldwin and the way that Baldwin has given us the like board, basically foundation, the like place to start, the mountain to like start from, stand upon. I think the way Baldwin has given us the platform or like the ideas and also the framework to like engage the people in the philosophical questions that are needed in this time in the wake of a civilizational crisis of the ruling class, I think puts Du Bois and Baldwin on the same like level as Buddha. So okay, yeah, I know that was a lot, but that was us trying to give an overview of all we've done, and I think we should be very proud of ourselves. And I know that at least for me, I wish that we could go back in time with what we know now, but something that's meant to be like this. I think it was important that we even made 2024 the year of James Baldwin, and we put that stake in the ground for people to forever reckon with. Like you can't just walk down the path and not see that mark of like this was the year of James Baldwin. Like what does that mean? But I think Serafina is going to talk about some ideas or like qualitative changes that free school has made through the year of James Baldwin.
You said most, because I think that was really helpful and beautiful the way that we can now think about through these events how our ideas have crystallized a lot, and I always appreciate that, and I think that was really great. I guess like two things I wanted to note was that like, you know, throughout the year of Baldwin, people have come in and out of free school. And one of our concerns in the beginning of the year are distracting forces and groups that are not interested in the truth, and how we would make our way to keep our stake in the ground, like you're saying, and confronting it and dealing with new forces, whether they be with people or with ideas, has helped us a lot. And you know, we've had our meeting that assessed like Year of Baldwin reading groups, and we've talked about how as individuals and people part of free school, how much we've changed and on that level. But I guess what I'm also saying is that the revolutionary and the truth doesn't stop really for anybody. And I think that we've made clear not only our relationship to the people and its institutions, whether that be in Chicago and Philadelphia, but the nature of that relationship. And I am talking about like the compassion that I feel like that we, or the community that you're saying, that would be the wellspring for the incoming year of 2025, I think. And I think that the Year of Baldwin has been a different year for free school And it has brought more, like you're saying, like I think it's important when you're saying about philosophy. It's brought things to come together in more clarifying ways, whether that be about our chronology or the like moral reconciling with the ideological, that the free school is not just a leftist Marxist thinking or like we are beholden to a dogma or a specific line or a specific man of destiny, that we're becoming that in a dialectical process with people in a real time. And I think that was important to begin the discussion with. I had gone back to a couple of free schools to think about this question of what has been achieved with the Year of Baldwin, and you know, first questions that come to mind are like, well, what do we do with our events? What could we have done better, and why? But it was interesting when I found free school from 10 months ago, when we had thought about the revolutionary thinking for our times. And in this episode, we had Doc's presentation. We were beginning to ask the specific questions that became crystallized in the documentary. What makes Baldwin a revolutionary? And you had posed, what makes a revolution? And I think it is true. Throughout the Year of Baldwin, there have been specific free schools that helped catapult or was, because free schools are already moving in a certain process, helped kind of like streamline our ideas in a better way. And I think these questions that Docu had raised in this episode was a beginning that we will further like generate from and think about, or like it'll come up later, like either in the book club or the reading groups or the through avant-garde, or as we're talking about now of our current crisis, how we assess it, modernity, liberalism, the Renaissance, and on top of asking like what makes a revolution and going through 1848 and what made the Bolshevik party, you had gone through, I think it was trying to assess these things about like the anti-colonial struggle, what makes it a revolutionary struggle, and also the emerging of the Black proletariat as a decisive force in history, and how Du Bois was the only man to accurately and scientifically explain the American revolutionary process, which begins the discussion that you're raising about Du Bois and Baldwin. And you're bringing up the unanswered questions, which we had thought through in our documentary, or had brought up in our documentary. And the narrative of the documentary is also part of that philosophic, like, or ideological decisions, like how things are framed, why questions are raised in certain ways, or, you know, not all by chance, but kind of partial to it, to a certain extent, in my opinion. Whatever feels right is also like what we bring up, meaning not what just feels right, but what we bring up is also part of ongoing discussions that Free School has been having, which also begins either 2023 or 10 months ago or whatever. And then you had brought up the problem of democracy, meaning the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line, and define what democracy is. And I thought that was a part of like, this is all to say that I think that there are specific things in our thinking that helped clarify why Baldwin is a revolutionary, which is our first claim.
Yeah.
And that had to do with a new chronology. What is this revolutionary chronology? What is modernity? How do we define modernity? Which I feel like now we're also kind of trying to answer. And like you had mentioned, the white social system, and then I think we were also dealing with in the year of Baldwin, the ideological and counter-revolutionary processes of the ruling elite, like the queering of Baldwin, and that had to deal with how so this problem we were dealing with in the reading groups themselves more so at this point as we focus more on it, like you're saying. Now, I really like how you said that, because I think just to take a step back, part of now that I'm at the table with you guys and reconciling the year, strategic issues come up with events and what, the reading groups, what is best at different times. Those are all on the table to work out or whatever. But so the queering of James Baldwin is a question that we were to deal with. And one of the best ways that we dealt with it is in our reading groups. I think, identity politics and liberalism also were dealt with best in the reading groups. Like I think it was just an easier tool, an easier mechanism. But yeah, I mean, that's all I have to say. I'm excited to discuss about the event and the science conference. But I thought that it was important the theoretical and ideological assertions that we have been doing, because I think moving forward we'll have to I have a feeling that something about the crisis, something about modernity is very striking, and also something that is, what's the word? It's almost why Martin Luther King got killed, really. Because one of the reasons why you've been bringing him up to me recently is the civilizational, the depths in which Martin Luther King had understood the civilizational crisis. Which I feel now that we've asserted that Baldwin is a revolutionary, why Baldwin is a revolutionary, this is something that we can assert. And yeah.
Just a couple of things. The role of avant-garde and Michelle and Kathy's interviews with Leo and with Alfie. These are very significant in the year of Du Bois. And I think two of them and their followers are very grateful to the free school for recognizing them. And it is a contribution. The you know, part of the situation is that we were going against what most of the country considered celebrating Baldwin. I don't know whether it was the Smithsonian, I think it was the Smithsonian, the queering of Baldwin, but all of it was about queering him. I don't care whether it was Schomburg or most recently the Brooklyn Public Library. And it was, I felt shameful that Howard Washington Library, this great structure, had done nothing. And then when we tried to do something, they tried to consign us to a room that was so small we had to turn people away. The other thing is our growing friendship with the Nation of Islam at the highest level. Minister Ismail Mohammed and the way they welcomed us to Mosque Mariam. And of course here with Mosque number 12. And it is a warm relationship, but also with the churches. The other thing is that in studying Baldwin, we grew, but we realized that we had to be worthy of him and to demonstrate who he was and what his ideas are about. We had to study the Black social system here in Philadelphia and churches and, you know, the study of Black gods of the metropolis, that phenomenon, and their cosmologies, and why these cosmologies are important in understanding the consciousness of Black folk. You know, to learn about Mother Dabney, to attend the Garden of Prayer, of course, Zion, and so on. Nobody else in the country, and this is not to wave our flag, but to say that there's something wrong when principal institutions of this country have done so little about Baldwin and so distorted him, and to take him out of the context of the American Revolutionary process. It is shameful. It is shameful. I'm particularly dissatisfied with the historically Black colleges and universities, in particular Lincoln University, for not doing anything. This is shame on the Black misleadership class. But I think this contribution is a contribution to Philadelphia, but I think to the country. A lot of people knew about it and know about what we're doing. It is shameful that the young leftists, and I put quotes, movement, have shown themselves to be well, to put it mildly, ideologically corrupted by identity politics, where they felt there was no need to participate in Baldwin, or no need to do it if the free school was sponsoring it, you know. But it's shameful. But we also, I would say, were able to make a closer assessment of the people. And it's ironic. I know the data that you presented, that youth are the most alienated from the system, and I think that's true. But ideologically, at least in what a lot of what we saw in the reading groups, is that older people, especially older Black working people, are far in advance of that. You know, so many seem to be caught up in queer politics and identity politics and all of the postmodernist garbage, and are more ready to contest us than they are the ruling elite. At least some of those that come to the reading groups. It is a problem. I think it was a problem at Lotus, you know. But on the other side, the great student encampments, the science conference came out of our response to that and what it said and what about the universities and Zionism and so on. I thought that the call to that conference written by Sombarto and Porval was brilliant. In fact, we were organizing and then they read it. I said, well, we're 80% of the way there now. But to define the state of Israel as a Nazi regime, which many others have concluded as well. And this 2024 was one of the most turbulent years for all kinds of reasons. And it made Baldwin live because his ideas addressed this kind of turbulence. It made him live. And, you know, part of, you know, our back and forth at Zion is with older people who have retired from life, you know, and that's a problem. I mean, I hope most of you, when you get older, you don't retire, you stay on the battlefield, because, you know, once you give up, there's no reason to live, and you don't live. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But anyway, to awaken Zion, to say this is what you were and this is what you must become. My last thing is that, and I, you know, when I talk about this idea of the all humanity struggle, I think is specific and important for this era, this epoch that we're living in. And any other way to formulate the unity of the people, of the world, of the globe, any other way to attempt to do it fails. And I'll give an example, some examples of it. But I think everything we have done has acknowledged this is a moment of crisis and to establish the civilizational foundations of the crisis. And can a ruling class whose civilization is in crisis continue to rule? And then there are other questions. But then my last point is the point that Serafina brought up about the centrality of the struggle for democracy. And democracy being a form of state, of the state, the organization of the state and the state's relationship to the people. And so, you know, when we talked about democracy, we talked about the Indian anti-colonial struggle, the African anti-colonial struggle, the Chinese Revolution. They all proclaimed democracy. They fought colonialism, but they were not against modernity. And I think to get so much of this clear and on the table has been very, very important for us and for other people. This kind of theoretical and philosophical clarity. Without it, we would become sidelined. And that the free school is different now than it was a year and a half ago. We have grown. we have grown and we are different. And I think a lot of people recognize this. I'm reminded of Jasmine Banks and her wonderful husband, Sidney, when they came to the opening of the exhibit, which was wonderful. And the Central Branch of the Free Library is proud of that achievement. And the president of the library is proud of it. And frankly, I saw Emma and Grace grow and become more confident, become more trusting of the free school. They're different women than they were a year and a half ago. But that exhibit and Jasmine saying how much she appreciates the free school. Jaron Muhammad, how much matter of fact, he goes so far as to say, this is an act of God, you know, to let me know that I didn't do none of this. Agent of God. Yeah, I mean, which leads to, you know, me cursing him out on the phone. Using the F word and other things, which he uses towards me. So, but for Jasmine's assessment, I thought it was very, and her husband Sidney, that that the free school represents the future form of the struggle. Osiris Wildfire and his colleague, Clarence, I forget his name. Daryl. I mean, and Zumbi and Bobby and all of these artists who don't just come, but express this love for the free school, and by which they mean everybody in it. And you know, Alfie says something similar to Jerome. You know, you people are angelic. Dwight used that same word for Alice.
Y'all calling people out.
Yeah, well, I don't mean to call you out, Dwight, but when we at your crib, you know, but it's been such a revelation. And I think, like Serafina said, as we move into 2025, and of course, the year Baldwin must come to an end, all things are said. Yeah, but there are a lot of people that don't want them to end. I don't think they want the reading group at Lucian Blackwell Library to end. I think there are people at the Central Branch that don't want it to end, but we got to end it, man. I mean, look, I'm tired, man. But
Doc never says that.
yeah, but I got tired now, man. But yeah, that's all I would like to say right now. And what, by the way, y'all did a beautiful job, man.
Yes.
Beautiful. You know, and I would just say, not only saying the practical things that we did, but the theoretical and philosophical and the thinking that went into it, which was as difficult as doing these things.
More difficult.
Yeah, even more difficult. Can I just tell one small story? I guess everybody knows the story. You know, I was given the job of writing the script for the documentary. You heard this before. And for some reason, I got stuck and I couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
And
hard.
I thought about this.
Yeah, and I threw the towel and I said, I can't do this. I told Seraphine and Emily, and they said, no, we're going to do this. And they came to my house and we started working on this. And I think the line of the documentary, some people believe it is the best documentary on Baldwin, not because it is technically the best and so on, but because it clarifies Baldwin.
Yeah.
And for me, the two, and I always say this, two strongest points was the different chronology, which I think is hugely important. Because without that chronology, you do not look at the United States and the US people, and certainly Black people. With that chronology, you understand the anti-slavery, anti-racist struggle. And once you understand that, you understand what Du Bois is saying. And once you understand that, we could take that documentary to India, to China, to Africa, where people have a very difficult time understanding what's going on here in American history. They will learn, or they will be able to see something they didn't see before. And the last part is the concept of love. And we have to work on that more. That is the source of many people's dismissing of the civil rights movement and King. And certainly, like we were saying, you take the queer movement, the postmodernist identity movements. One, they talk about a lot of things, but one thing you never hear them talking about is love. But they're going to queer ball. You know, well, that means you eviscerate the very essence of his concept of new social relationships based on love. So that's what I would say.
I'm going to say, well, first of all, I think it was very impressive, the outline and, just the assessment. I was thinking about it yesterday when I saw the preschool email, and I was like, okay, let me also reassess what the year of Baldwin has been like. And honestly, I mean, it's almost like a miracle to me that you guys brought it all together. And I just have a few things that I feel like I could fill in because I've been thinking about this stuff. Well, first of all, I like what you said about the overt political objective from the beginning of the year being to establish Baldwin as a revolutionary. Because unlike King and Du Bois, even in as much as I know of what people read or who they are into, Baldwin is popular and his novels in some ways have been popular, but there's always the relationship of people in this country especially, and then it's a whole different question if you ask how somebody in India is reading Baldwin. The relationship is always a personal and narcissistic one, where the way you talk about Baldwin is that, oh, he's like a therapist to me. He helps me understand my inner feelings and how I'm going to deal with the world. And I guess there is some value in that. I won't, I guess I'm harsh towards this entire attitude to begin with, but I'm willing to concede that this is an important part, dealing with the existential question of you as an individual. And I do think Baldwin helps with that, but it was very important to say that he is not just, a therapist. He is a revolutionary and he's indispensable. Like we literally cannot go forward without Baldwin and what he established or what he tried to tell the American people and the world. So that was very important. And of course, this comes together in its most triumphant, assertive form in the documentary, where we actually go through the logic, like Emily said, of why we say he's a revolutionary thinker. And part of that was also developing or at least clarifying the categories of the theory that proceeds from Baldwin and proceeds from Du Bois. And I feel like a lot of this year really, even through especially in the free school classes we have every Saturday, has been focused on almost offering a new science or a new theory that could be put to use in this moment, because this is a time, again, like Emily said, that calls out for philosophy and theory, because you can see that the people are making moves. They're trying to move somewhere. And, just the betrayal of, Western science and Western academia in the counter-revolution of knowledge has literally shackled people because they don't have the terms on the basis of which they can struggle and move forward. So this emphasis on theory and developing a new science, a new revolutionary science and theory was very important, I think, in the whole worldview of free school this year, even outside of the events. So I wanted to say that. And then the other thing that I really liked in what Emily said, and of course the chronology, because
Yeah.
Without the chronology, you don't have a way of understanding. Like for somebody who did not live through that time or did not live through, or wasn't close to the struggle, like somebody like me, but also maybe a lot of young Black people today who've only heard about it or been given it as an inheritance, but only partially. I think the chronology is important to center the question of freedom once again, because otherwise you can sort of see the Black freedom struggle in the ways that somebody like Fukuyama or the Democratic Party people see it, which is basically just advancing of personal freedoms, but now for Black people. Like white people have it, so now Black people. But that is such an incomplete understanding of what this freedom movement was, because it was literally, like everybody has been saying, it was saying, no, this is a civilizational crisis. It's not just about racism as, philosophy. It's basically something that has not been worked out in Western civilization and in the psychology of the white person. Because yes, we do want equal citizenship, we want rights, we want to be treated as human beings and with dignity, but then we want, as a whole, all of America to proceed towards a new civilization that actually made sense. And that was king, and that's what Baldwin was talking about. That's why he spent so much time trying to expose the psyche of the white man, and so on and so forth. So the chronology really brings it to the question of freedom, and from then it becomes easier to basically defend against the attacks against Baldwin, and especially the attacks of identity politics and queering, because you can then, on the basis of that chronology, ask the question: is anything you're saying related to the question of freedom? Is like, okay, yeah, you can say personal freedom, but are you contributing, or is your theory in any way contributing to the furthering of human freedom and civilization based on freedom? So it gave us the ground to defend Baldwin or the theory of Baldwin. So that was very important. And the other thing I really liked about, I think Emily, you said this idea of a memory, the documentary really making alive a memory that has been extinguished from the consciousness of a lot, if not most, Black people, because we did this documentary screening in so many places in the reading groups, and it was always very fascinating to see how other people responded, because we were too close to it, so we had our own thoughts about the documentary. But really what came, I think I understood the purpose of the documentary. I think Emily also said this, when other people responded to it, and when other people. And one of the most striking and consistent response to the documentary, especially from older working class Black people, was that, yes, we did this. This was us, And I remember especially, I think the most recent memory I have is of the Lucian Blackwell one. I don't know, that's the one, because then we had a big round table discussion and all these older women who remembered part of this history, but it was almost like they were re-remembering. And I know we make a joke about this, how the Nation of Islam would say, remind. Well, I mean, I actually think it makes a lot of sense.
It's
Because
really funny.
this is knowledge that you had of yourself. That's right. And Baldwin, we did call him a prophet. Saint Baldwin for the children. But that memory was so important, because I feel like it was almost like people coming to terms with what their historic role has been. And I mean, I think all of the, like what you were saying about Jasmine, but what also this man at the Chicago documentary screening, this whole question of, okay, in the documentary, you show that the Black struggle was central to this world, almost a zeitgeist of anti-white supremacy struggle, or a struggle against white supremacy, a struggle against imperialism, and a struggle for human freedom. It was at the center of this world movement. But then how are we supposed to respond in this moment to a genocide going on in Gaza? And what are we going to say to people like Kamala Harris, who claim they have nothing they can do about it, but then still claim to derive from the Black freedom movement? How do you expect? So, I feel like this idea of memory or reminding yourself of your role was a very important task of the documentary, and also how we wanted to place Baldwin in this moment. And I think it revealed that there is, like Emily was saying, a hunger for ideas for somebody like Baldwin, but there is also a capacity and consciousness, again, perhaps most heightened among working class Black people, where they have the memory of this time, but they also have, the consciousness of what to do with that memory or what to do with that history moving forward. So yeah, and I think in that context, I also want to bring up what happened in this election. It's not disconnected from that. And I've said this before, it like sort of gave me chills that this was happening in the year of Baldwin, with this movement of Black people away from the Democratic Party. The only way to interpret is that the people have already started moving somewhere. And what requires is to sort of fortify, solidify, strengthen that movement by, with theory and, everything else that I said before. And the last thing I want to talk about is what Doc was also touching on, the question of the human being and the question of love. And I feel like in the last few months, maybe starting from the science conference, but especially in the last month or so, we have really been focused on the question of the human being versus the question of the individual as we sort of assess the crisis of Western civilization itself, or the liberal consensus itself, where we are reaching the conclusion, I think, that the Enlightenment or European philosophical thought and how it interpreted the individual or how it interpreted freedom has almost come to a point where it's been proven to be insufficient to reach a certain fulfillment of a human being. And I think that gap, or that, that leap that needs to be made, can really come from what Doc was also saying, this acceptance that love is not just a feeling, but it's a revolutionary force. And it is in some ways like the most basic of human impulses, but then one that you have to take and, basically you have to take it to its revolutionary conclusion and use it to forge this new civilization that we have to talk about. Almost like an antidote to this, very, I don't know, this individualistic, this almost like the tendency of retreat that Western ideas of the individual forces upon people. And I also really like what Emily said about, the suppression of knowledge being more suffocating in some ways, even than the most abject of poverty. And I don't want to simplify or lessen, what poverty is or what suffering is. But I do think, as long as I think this came out through the Year of Baldwin also, as long as people have a fighting chance, as long as they have a consciousness and a fighting chance, I think human beings are capable of surmounting greater odds than, suffering and poverty. That's been shown by history over and over. But it's really the attack on knowledge and the attack on consciousness that shackles a people and incapacitates a people like nothing else. And yeah, I think I've lost the train of my thought. But basically that I was going to connect it to love in some way. But now,
because this morning, Sophie and I were talking, she reminded me of South Philly High School.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Yes.
So where that was a reading group that we began with, but had to stop. And what always struck me about the stories Alice would say about South Philly High School, which you're talking about in preschool, is that these kids who, like a lot of the kids who are part of that reading group, and it was a few, that what they had, which you could say that a lot of young people after they leave higher education lose, is actually like a sort of consciousness that already comes from specifically like here you have like these young Black kids who immediately can talk easily about why love. It is something that is the opposite of let's take like highly educated young people who insist that like what's more important than love, which I won't really talk about, is that I am queer, or that I think that I like have a carved out I have my own reality, my own truth. You guys will never be able to understand me. I'll never be able to understand you, and that's cool. Like, all just live in our fragmented realities and like call it a day, and just accept that we're all oppressed. It sucks. Life sucks, and I guess we're just gonna have to sit here until we decompose.
Right.
And it's very different than like South Philly High School, where there's a consciousness that exists in very young people who are going to a high school which is under-resourced. There is violence in the school and outside of school, but that what they still have and are able to discuss through Baldwin is something even just like my mom, like the greatest example of love to me is my mother's love. And that must mean something. Or like Baldwin was able to live. So maybe that means I want to learn how to live too. Like it's a very different consciousness that actually and okay, this is actually something I realized pedagogically like a while ago is in some ways I actually think that the pedagogy that I would say we're starting to develop in these reading groups is actually not that dissimilar from the pedagogy that like a student from the South Philly High School would engage in naturally.
Right.
That's how I was thinking about that. That actually the pedagogy that all human beings need can already be found in the way that children or youth talk. If that makes sense. Does it make sense? Like it's the same, it's in some ways that philosophic engagement.
Yeah.
I put like a philosophic engagement is actually a revolutionary engagement. It's about morals. I don't know. It has retained a certain category. There's still a certain sense of like, I want to learn what makes life, like what is life,
Yeah.
and then what is an infringement upon life.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah, that makes sense.
No, I think that makes all the sense in the world because it's also saying that it's not about your favorite pedagogy, but that there is a right pedagogy for this time. And I had not thought about it like the way you put it, but I think it makes sense to me, this idea that the right pedagogy is something that youth and children can organically connect to because there is something about the way a young person is conditioned to sort of integrate them to a society that takes away some of the organic impulses that you have towards making sense of the world or making sense of what love means or all of that. So I would agree with that. And the last thing I want to say is I think towards the end of the year more than towards the beginning, I think it came from the documentary and it came from all the events and the reading groups. I think it was very clarifying for me to understand the queer movement sort of juxtaposed to what we understood about Baldwin, because honestly, it does seem like a fabricated movement with the explicit purpose of mounting an attack against love itself, or love as a way of human beings relating to each other. And just like this is the contrast, right? Love as the center of the Black freedom movement, basically permeating both the political strategy but also the transformation of the individual as part of the Black freedom movement. Clearly, like the strength of a philosophy like that was not lost on those who wanted to kill that kind of heightened consciousness of that kind of a movement emerging from the people. And so, the queer movement, for as much as they talk about, love who you love or the freedom to love who you love, ultimately it becomes, an attack on what love is supposed to do for human beings or what role it's supposed to fill in society, which is not just a feel good, I'm, people, whatever, but it is a revolutionary role that it has to play in society. And you want to extinguish that by, again, distorting it and abstracting it and cutting it up into a million pieces so that it's unrecognizable once you're done with it. But I feel like that also, although it was not an overt purpose of the Year of Baldwin, that became very important personally also for me to understand, because honestly, I'll say I've never really understood how you counter something like that. Like, how do you talk to people on the basis of when somebody is coming to you and their only basis is this is how I feel, and
Yeah.
this is my truth. How do you counter it? It's very difficult. But I feel like the Year of Baldwin and the documentary in particular, and some of the events really gave or created the grounds on which you could do this on an ideological, philosophical basis. But yeah, that's all I have to say.
Well, I was going to, I was going to start with, I was going to say, throughout you guys' assessment of the whole year, I thought it was very moving because it's actually hard to really understand and reconcile how much has been achieved this year, how much we've been able to do this year, and as free school, but also as people in free school. And I wanted to, the thing that you guys are just saying right now about philosophy, I wanted to say that I think I had always, I don't think I understood what it really means. In some ways, I think this year has been a proof of why the preschool is called what it's called. Like, why do we talk about philosophy and Black liberation? I think it's I don't think I ever thought about it because it seemed, whatever, it's obvious. But I think, I used to think of philosophy vaguely. I mean, I think we all sort of, vaguely think of philosophy as, like how to live and, like a map or to work out, questions about life and all of that. But I think really at the center of it is the question of how to act. How to live is basically to say how to act. And I agree with what Emily was saying, that I think this is seen most readily in children because for children it is existential. You have to know how to act. You have to know how to live your life, how to act, and only only at a later stage, I think, like after you have been through this assault that academia and everything else in society, which comes also from academia. Like what it does is to tell you that there can be no coherent framework of acting, and it's all about the postmodern idea of there being individual truths and so on and so forth. But ultimately, it's about the question of how to act, and I think we've been able to see that this is the task that we are that we task ourselves with today, that okay, we are trying to really figure out on what basis are people going to act. And I think the chronology which we have been talking about to understand the revolutionary chronology in America is also to ask this question, on what grounds of knowledge are people able to act today? And it's not a question of, it's not, what we were saying, maybe the same thing, that it's not about, which is your favorite chronology, but it's about what allows you to act, what allows the people to act. And this was, this was sort of a proof of what I think I didn't understand before, that, we have talked about this many times, especially during the science conference, but we talked about love as a prerequisite for knowledge. And I think, this has been, I don't think I fully believed in it 6 months back, but you wrote it. But, I think that's the
You believe before you understand.
but that's the thing. I think it's difficult to sort of understand the meaning of it, because I think what the reading groups especially has shown, that to understand the task for us was is also not just to talk about Baldwin and what Baldwin has done for us, but also to understand people, like ordinary people who all have ordinary complex lives, to understand them. And I don't think it's possible to understand people without loving them. And this was, I think it required a lot of, I think all of us were humbled in many ways in how we talk to people. And this was very clear, for me, it was very clear, with the new reading group at Lucian Blackwell. How do you talk to people who don't necessarily agree with you about everything, and they all have, they've all had their own trajectory of coming to Baldwin. The only point on which we meet is the fact, okay, there's something about Baldwin that moved you at some point. That's why you brought yourself out of whatever you had to do in your day to this reading group. And I think it was important for us to figure out how to talk to them and how to really establish that we are not. I think the thing that sets the free school as the only, that's the only place for, the future, for people of the future, is because I think, we don't see ourselves as the St. Pauls of the world. Like, we are not trying to, go out and, like, uh, establish a line of thought or whatever, but we are really trying to say that, okay, we all have complex histories and complex lives, but it does begin with understanding ourselves at this time. This is the task that, this is what is unique to the revolution it was in America, because I think this is also what we talk about in the documentary and all of that, that politically, it's not about political economy. It has not determined the American Revolution process. But really, what this means is, as King said, I mean, the task in America is a radical remaking of society. Is a radical a revolution of values, and I think this is very important. This was very clarifying with the documentary, but really throughout the year, that you cannot understand people without loving them. And what does it mean to love? The implications of love and the responsibility it puts on you. But the other thing is that, by loving people, you can also understand yourself better. And I think this is something that I think we've all come a long way from a few years back, but even from the beginning of this year, that we have come to understand who we are, and to see that, okay, no, we're not above the people in any way. We don't at the same time as we talk to everybody about Baldwin and what brought us here to the free school, which is something we talk about all the time in the reading groups. It's also about understanding something in everyone else that moves them, and whatever moves them is something about them. It's not entirely about whatever we are saying. And I think to understand that, and to humble ourselves in reading groups has been very important for uh, I guess this was my first year-long celebration in free school. So I think it's something else, that a whole year of engaging with people, it does to you. It shows you the capacities of people, and also what the free school is all about. And I was saying this because what was I going to say? Oh yeah, I think this is why, to go to what something Purva was mentioning about how Baldwin is so popular, and how people, respond to Baldwin in very different ways. Oh, he's my personal therapist and all of that.
Right.
I think a year back, I would have dismissed that kind of a response to Baldwin. And I think now I feel a little differently about it. I think that people respond to Baldwin in that way because there is something unique about him that that does not come from that does not even come from Du Bois completely, because, and this is talk about the Baldwin Du Bois complementarity, which we started thinking about a while back, and especially at the round table at the science conference. I think we clarified for ourselves also that they come from very different times, and to understand Baldwin today, to fully understand Baldwin today, is impossible without understanding this trajectory, though, where I come from whence I come. And this is because what Du Bois, I mean, I think I see Du Bois as a scientist and Baldwin as the artist, but what Du Bois is also doing is establishing the science of understanding, human beings. He's talking about sociology, but he's also, when he talks about, for instance, law and chance. He's talking about the ability of human beings to act outside of the circumscribed laws which describe them. And this is very important to even create a Baldwin. But what Baldwin is also able to do is to say that the transformation of society is your own transformation. There is no revolutionary process which does not transform the individual human being. And I think this was very important for this time to understand, how do we engage? How do you politically engage with people who probably do see Baldwin as just not, as like just an icon. I mean, like just somebody who writes about how I live my life or how that resonates with me and all of that, but not think about the fact that you are also a product of history. And I think this is why the question of how you reach, or how, like, what draws you to Baldwin is, I think there is something important in this, that the question of Du Bois and Baldwin, the complementarity between them helps address it. That this is the whole thing about the individual and the human being, that the human being is a product of history. He is an individual, but the human being is produced by and therefore is capable of changing history. And this was, I think this is, this comes out every time every time we talk about, like in the reading groups, how we engage with people and what really are the contradictions that people are also struggling with. Everyone knows that, they have a theory of, they have some sense of why they do what they do, why they're drawn to Baldwin and all of that. But everyone also, I think, understands contradictions. But I think our work over the year has shown that, okay, this is something people are capable of taking up. People are capable of figuring out something about themselves and therefore figuring out, how to act. And I just wanted to say a few other things, but I'm losing. Yeah, maybe I'll come back, but maybe that's.
Can I say something? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll just respond to Humberto and Gerba. I mean, I want to talk about love, but I'll get to that because I think a lot of young people my age, younger, who are interested in revolutionary change, they have been going toward sort of building a vanguard party, whether it's ACP, PSL, CPUSA, which I guess I haven't heard about in a while. And the free school is different in that, we're not practicing martial arts in Malcolm X Park. We're not, all these different things. All these things are different about the free school. And it relates to Baldwin and the Year of Baldwin in that, what other organization is doing in the city of Philadelphia or in the nation is doing, whole year reading campaigns and then reevaluating how we're affecting the city, what relationships have changed, how we have changed. And it relates to the chronology and the Enlightenment and the revolutions of 1848, because if you see the revolutions of Europe as your model, then there's so much that you miss. We talked about how the pinnacle of the Enlightenment was the state, how it changed the state, communism, the communist state, the liberal state, and the relationship between the state and the individual. But to get to the next level, the Enlightenment never had a conception of love. Only, I won't say only Indian philosophy, but other philosophies have a concept of love. And, to bring it back to me, how have I grown in the Year of Baldwin? Or how have we all grown in the Year of Baldwin? We talk also about how we inherited something from James Baldwin. We were tasked by James Baldwin, and our role to be agents of revolutionary change. But only the people can make a revolution. And so, to those people who are concerned about building a party or engaging in urban guerrilla warfare, or spontaneous uprisings, or acts of propaganda of the deed, we recognize that it's the people that make the revolution, and the role of the revolutionary is to increase the capacity of the people, to increase their potential. And I think that's that goes back to, why is James Baldwin a revolutionary? He didn't engage in Malcolm X didn't engage in violence. Martin Luther King didn't engage in violence. And it is only the free school that has accepted that inheritance, has accepted that task of raising the capacity of the people in that way. And there's something that Grace said when she was attending free school, where she said some people come to the reading groups because they want to be thought of as a person who reads Baldwin, not as, and Baldwin really heightens the contradictions. Every time we're in a reading group, the temperature is higher. And I think people have noticed that in attending the reading groups. But yeah, I mean, that's the role of a revolutionary, to heighten the contradictions, to increase the capacity of people, to unite the advance and disparage the backwards. I forget how it goes. And I mean, it's difficult, what those people are doing, and what those people are doing who want the aesthetic of Baldwin, but they don't want the substance. But it's also the people who want to join PSL or CPUSA. They want the aesthetic of a revolutionary life, but then you don't want the substance, because it's hard, to explore. We talked about this at the beginning. It's hard to develop a concept of love in a time like this, in when we don't even have the foundation, nothing in our schooling could ever prepare us for this. It could only set us backwards. Love. And then finally, I wanted to talk about what Shabarta was saying about like the dialectics of love. Love helps you understand other people, but it also helps you understand yourself. There's also a dialectics of violence. People say violence begets violence. This guy who blew up the Tesla car, I didn't read the manifesto, but if he did say America only understands violence, then we're in for a rocky road. If that's true, is that your conception? And so if you do think that the choices are love or violence, then obviously the choice is love, because if violence begets violence, love begets love. But yeah, it's very difficult to draw out scientific conclusions. I really like what you were talking about. Love is a necessity for knowledge, even though I don't understand it, because it's just so difficult to talk about the science of love. There's no foundation for it. And it should be a priority for us, because that's what makes the preschool revolutionary. That's what sets us apart. That's what and then also I just think about all the young people who are going down the wrong path. The path of pessimism. There's a path of postmodernism. I'll just end with this. Around 2 years ago, I had a friend who was very intelligent. He was a member of DSA, and he was studying. He wanted to go to grad school to study continental philosophy, which is the school of philosophy that Judith Butler is in. And he just disappeared off the face of the earth. I don't know where he went. And he became really depressed, even though he was the most brilliant young man I've ever met. He was 22, but he could talk to Doc about Kant, and he would talk about Kant, Judith Butler, all this stuff. And his understanding of philosophy was so thorough and complete. but because he didn't have love, or I don't know what he was going through, he was depressed or something. It's just, I see the potential of him as he doesn't view himself with any potential, but it's just really sad to see our peers, you know, going through this. And yeah.
Yeah, I think I do see, you know, this friend of yours that you've described going through a crisis of knowledge, and going through a crisis of knowledge not because he does not have knowledge. He certainly does have a lot of information in his head. But what about the information that is necessary for you to connect to other people? You know, the thing that we have been talking about this entire year, the relevance and importance of epistemology. And I think that I've noticed this entire year, like in going back and assessing this whole thing, it's not enough to just know. It's not enough to just have the information, have all of these relevant resources at your fingertips to be able to talk about Kant, Hegel, and Marcuse or whatever. But if you can't use it properly, I don't think that's not it as in the knowledge, but if you can't use it for a particular purpose, if you are not connected to humanity, all of that knowledge is worthless. It's really irrelevant. And I think that is what the science conference that we did and the science conference that we're going to do moving forward is going to help open up. You know, like this idea has to breathe. I really, you know, when I heard this, that love is prerequisite for knowledge, I hadn't heard that for a long time. It came when I heard it today. I really felt it. That yes, how are you supposed to know if you can't use it in service of something? If you can't love another person to be able to know that your knowledge is being used for something. I see, you know, depressed PhD students at Penn all the time, and they're very, very enthusiastic, and they're very, very, you know, dedicated to their science, but they're depressed. And I would say that they're depressed because they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to channel it into people, into human beings. And yeah, I have to think about this a lot more. Love is a prerequisite for knowledge. How that makes sense in our times. I think it's important. It ties everything together, I feel. And I want to respond to something that Purva and Shambarto said about, you know, Baldwin being used as a personal therapist. I have used him as a personal therapist. To be completely honest, I think that Baldwin came into my life when I was ready for him, when I was ready to accept him. And he taught me how to live in a way. But that's not all he taught me, right? He taught me that, okay, this is step one. You have an understanding of yourself. It's step zero. It's still a long way to go. What you do with your understanding of yourself is where the real struggle comes in. And I think that Baldwin can teach us a lot of things, but he also teaches us that there is a bigger struggle. There's something greater out there. Look at the children, look at the future, look at all of these things which are greater than you. The only use that you have of understanding yourself is how you look at other people. That helps you. Like the concept of the mirror is what we keep going back to. I think it's very relevant for today because I see myself in the people of Palestine. I see them in me and me in them. And that's how I know that I love them, even though I have not met them. And I cry for them. And I think Baldwin helped me do that. Baldwin helped me. I don't know. I think that one of the things that I admire most about him in his writing is that he is very honest about himself. If there is something that he has done, he will admit, like matter of factly, he'll write it down. Yeah, I used the MF word in a Christian household, called my friend out for something. Doesn't make him look too good, but he'll say that, yeah, that's what I did because that's who I am. And I think that that is something that, like, all of these things we're trying to like bring out in our reading groups. And I think that our reading groups have served a purpose. Using Baldwin, we have been able to somewhat put forward this assertion that the Black freedom movement has to be studied. We have to look at it. We have to look at this new chronology. We have to look at it through that lens, not the European lens, not organize or parody. And I think that when I talk to the people of my reading group, I get, some people have overtly told me, some people, I get the sense that there's nothing like this that they have found. Other reading groups, you read, you say, oh, this allegory is good, this metaphor is good, oh, so good, so good. The writing is so good. I think the fact that we have gone beyond that, beyond what is written on the page, and trying to connect that to our own lives, the lives of people around us, to international events, to the whole world, to world humanity. I think that is something that no other reading group that I have been a part of, or these people who tell me that they are part of other reading groups, they also are not a part of such a reading group. And I think it's important because when I think about this whole year of Baldwin and trying to think about it, what have we not covered? With this was a year about Baldwin, but we covered the crisis of knowledge, we covered the 2024 elections, the crisis of the state and the university, we covered art and philosophy, and all of the essays in avant-garde spanning different subjects, music, and making this whole documentary, Zionism, war, peace, so many things, And when I think about this, I think about the first time I watched this documentary, which was here, like when it was premiered, that's the first time I watched it. And I thought for the first 15 minutes, I was quite confused because I was like, this seems to be a documentary about the civil rights movement. And then I was like, after 15 minutes, I think, oh, okay. I mean, and I think that was an important realization for me to come to, that you cannot look at Baldwin separate from the civil rights movement. You cannot look at him separate from the people who he witnessed. I really like the fact that when Baldwin talks about himself, I always feel like he's talking about everybody he knows about. I did this. He's probably talking about 200 people he knows who has done the same thing. He does not see himself separate from the people. And that's also something that I'm trying to inculcate in myself, which helps me relate to the world better. Baldwin has written 6 novels, 6 short stories, so many poems, 2 plays, and maybe hundreds of essays. And in a lot of his novels, I feel like there were homosexual characters, and I use the word homosexual because that's the only word he used. That was his language. But it is really surprising that he's considered a queer icon, but then because he's written Giovanni's Room and his other novels has some other homosexual characters, but he's written so much more about the civil rights movement. He's written so much more about King and you know and whiteness and civilization and war and peace. He's written so much more about those things, you know. So why is he a queer icon? A very small. This is how you know you have to. That at least I could tell that this was a distortion. This whole thing was a distraction to keep us away from the real Baldwin.
Yep.
And honestly, I think that I got into Baldwin. When I say got into, I didn't get into. I was. I think I can relate to what Samir was saying, that I wanted the aesthetics of Baldwin, not the substance of Baldwin, because you know it was cool. So it's also hard to resist that temptation when you don't know any better. And that's why that's the lens through which I kind of understand all these young people. I try to see myself in them, them in me.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know Baldwin because of that one reason, because he was a gay black man and he was apparently moving forward, progressing this this struggle that I care about, which is the queer struggle. And then I read, you know, and then I read him, and I realized that I was trying to imagine a kind of microcosm and make it a whole universe, whereas Baldwin sort of put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Take a step back, you know, look at the whole picture." And I'm very grateful for him for that. And this is also why, this is also the kind of sentiment, I say sentiment, this is also sentiment with which, you know, the reading groups that go, I try to impress this, you know, accept him, like listen to what he's saying,
Right.
not interpret him for yourself and try to, you know, reinforce some things that you already believe in. Because that's the only way that you'll be able to really know him and really be, when you say that, oh, I'm in love with Baldwin's writing, that's the only way that you can really be in love with his writing. If you really believe him, if you really let him in. I was thinking about all of this when you said, oh, the queer movement is the only thing that they never talk about is love. Well, they talk about love in the way that, oh, we should be allowed to love whoever we want.
Oh, yeah.
And they say that I should be allowed to love a man or love a woman or anybody. But I only hear I should be allowed to love myself. Like this is a me thing. This is not a you thing. This is a freedom that I would like for myself. And the only reason why I would protest something is if my rights are being encroached upon. And this brings us to another thing. Oh my God, we've talked about so many things this year about the Plessy v. Ferguson and the protection and the of whiteness. And this brings us to one of the most main, like something that I've taken a lot from, which is this concept of safety that Baldwin talks about. In the pursuit of safety, you lose yourself. You know, you are as safe as the person next to you. And if you try to do anything to make yourself more safe, you are committing an act of violence against yourself and other people, because it takes you away from people. It creates a divide, and this distance, with this distance, you cannot know anything.
This is right.
And I feel like Baldwin provides, like I think Purva was saying, that he provides an antidote to this nihilistic, isolationist tendency, which is only encouraged because the people in power do not want you to harness this energy of unity, of love for people and humanity and other people. And I think the last thing that I wanted to say is this crisis of knowledge and education reminds me of something that Baldwin wrote in A Talk to Teachers, which is that as a society starts being educated, they start questioning the society in which one is educated. And I think that this was true in 1963 when he wrote it. This is true today. And our task in the political education of ourselves and others, I think is basically to serve this purpose, to live Baldwin's word and say, yes, rise up, question society. It is your right. It is your duty. It is your inheritance. And I've been really glad to have been a part of the Year of Baldwin with it.
I also wanted to say that about the identity politics movement, is that it's never about loving other people. It's all about self-love,
Right.
or your chosen family. And that means that, I think it's also an unfortunate trend that people tell you, oh, well, you can choose your family. You can also choose to discard your family. And I mean, not to say that family relations are easy after preschool. You can be in preschool and know how important family is and love it, and it's still hard. Your life is hard. But I forgot the other thing I was gonna say.
We want to check and see if we have any chat.
Yeah, maybe we can do comments and then move to the all humanities.
Okay.
But so we have a lot of comments. Todd says, "Good morning, preschool." He said John Jeter was on Billy Bob's show last week. It might be worth checking out to see how Jeter uses pieces of preschool thought to then obscure it into fantastical gibberish.
Whoa.
Another podcast for Doc to watch. And then he also says, also Judith Butler spoke recently in Korea. Her ideology and Dr. Horn's and Vijay Prashad's is what confuses most of the so-called left. That's interesting. We'd like to hear more. And then I think BK is responding to the panels from the science conference and says those were really great panels. Michelle Bell says, "Wow, sounds like a great year. I just found free school a couple months ago. I'm so glad I did." And then one commenter, Dan, is listening in from Colorado, which has a lot of snow. And then Todd, who's in the neighboring state of New Mexico, says, "We have no snow here." M. Sparks says that in Pittsburgh, it's very frosty. Hello, all from frosty Pittsburgh. Go Steelers. Michelle Bell continues and says, "Wonderful remarks by all the participants this morning. I'm really enjoying this. Y'all are the highlight of my week." Bumbleye 7 says, "There cannot be evolution." So this is when we start talking about, the next comments are from, I think, after we open the discussion with the Year of Baldwin, specifically the conversation about what is revolution, who is a revolutionary. Bambalai says, there cannot be evolution without change. The strange, different individual is important, the essence of free thinking. Matt says, there's something universal that you all are striking at, and through the experience / actors of the Black freedom struggle. But it is essential to recognize that others will arrive at the universal from indefinite paths. I'm not a little confused. Maybe do you mean different paths or indefinite? I don't know what indefinite paths is, so maybe you can clarify that. But he also continues, Matt continues, it seems like although free school is developing a specific theory / framework, ultimately it would be possible to generalize key principles in practice that may not depend on free school specific theory. For example, the essentiality of transcending ego. Bumbleye 7 says, a revolutionary must also take away the fear of nonconformity. We are more than consumers. And it says, the 3 stages of wisdom are thinker, knower, doer. Michelle Bell says, institutional mismanagement of our recent 3-year pandemic resulted in greater disconnection and fear of connecting with others, even those that we love. Bumbleye says, affirm that people need people and that people are people's medicine. What folks do in their bedroom is none of my business. And Matt says, a societal understanding of love, humanity's conception of love must be distinguished from the diminutive conception of love as personal affection, attachments, which are really the antithesis of love. Not an antithesis, maybe I would take that back, but a diminutive form. And then he said, yeah, I meant different paths in the earlier comment. Like when he was saying that free school striking at something universal, a universal theory that others can get at even without free school, which I would agree with. Yeah, so those are the comments from this morning's conversation. So maybe we can, talk about all humanity.
You know, it's getting a little chilly in here, so.
Yeah, you can't increase the temperature.
No, that's okay. I have a coat that I put on. But I just wanted to talk about, as we go forward, and I guess we'll be able to talk about this more in 2025, what type of movement would we like to see developed? Just one thing about the Year of Baldwin, where we tried to establish and criticize the Democratic Party for claiming to be the party that took up the torch of the civil rights movement, and that it is the party of Martin Luther King. And we tried to make the point, which I think will make the point more going forward, 2025, is that the Democratic Party and the Black misleadership class are not the inheritors of Baldwin or King or Du Bois or Black freedom, the Black freedom movement as such. But there were 2 things that struck me this week and forced me to think about what type of movement for this epoch of human history. One thing which I've been talking with Purba and Sambarto about is the collapse of theoretical physics. And this is a huge event, not the collapse of physics, but of theoretical physics, which was so tied up with string theory and some interpretations of quantum mechanics. And if you don't know these things, don't worry about it. They're easier to understand than you think, made complicated by the language of the so-called experts. But I have to tell you, and I guess for people in physics, it may be a time of celebration and taking victory laps. One of the major founders of string theory, Leonard Susskind, has now admitted that the whole enterprise has failed. He admitted it. And Huh? Oh, well, I'll show you the link, you know.
Please do.
And he admitted it like a dead, beaten dog. I mean, really. But the thing, if I might just tell you, see, this guy, from his position of power in the academy and in public discourse, had destroyed people's careers. And those people are bitter and on the sidelines of the academy. I mean, and I think Purba and Sambarto, as we go forward with this and try to clear the bushes and see what's what. But it collapsed. They had done dirty work against people who went into physics with a certain amount of joy to understand the world and were told there's no place for you here unless you bow down to string theory. So they've gone down. And it's so interesting is that this huge absence, this huge hole in the academy, the physical science academy, exists. And into that vacuum has come every kind of wild theory that you can imagine. I mean, they're so wild that it will take time even to figure them out. But the people who are putting them forward come off as, well, I guess they could use some help from Baldwin. They need a therapist. It just, you'd have to see it to believe it. I mean, these are the leading lights of a whole area of thought called theoretical physics. And they all seem to be crazy. And the theories they're putting forward are crazy theories. But that's where we are. So that collapsed. And the other thing, I finally started listening to podcasts of a person that Garland Nixon had told me to listen to. He insisted, you will learn a lot from this woman, and so on. And I said, but Garland, I spent 30 years of my life in that. I don't have to listen to anybody tell me what it is. I've been there, did that. And that is Jody Barr. I think she is a high official in the Communist Party of Great Britain, parentheses, Marxist Leninist. So, have you listened to it?
I need to get to it.
Okay. But how did you know? You seem to know a lot about that.
You know what I mean?
But
Todd had showed me her, but I haven't gotten to her.
Well. So, and you know, Garland has on his show at least twice a month, if not more. And I recently started listening to this podcast of hers because Billy Bob, famous Billy Bob, had said that, you know, on Facebook how brilliant she was, how much of a genius she was, and so on. So I listened. And, you know, a lot of it, or most of it, or all of it seemed very familiar to me, super familiar to me. And it was, call it a throwback, as to put it mildly. It was like, you know, if you want to go back in the days, I mean, it was a excursion to back in the days. I'm saying, oh my goodness. But one of the things she said, one of her formulations that explained everything for me that I needed to know, because you know how when you listen to something and you say, oh, this is so wrong. Oh, you're making such, but you seem to be so certain. Person seems to be so certain, so convinced, reminiscent of what you would get with a Jehovah's Witness that knocked on your door on Saturday morning. You know what I'm saying? Not against Jehovah's Witnesses. I have friends who are Jehovah's. Matter of fact, I have a friend who was a Jehovah's Witness preacher. Very brilliant man. We should go to his church sometime in West Philly. But, at some point, you say Saturday morning, I'm trying to get a few last winks in. I have shopping. Could you give me a break? But anyway, but it's reminiscent of string theory. Absolute certainty about what you were saying, and a airtight bubble that you live in. And if what you want is absolute assurance and certainty that the revolution is on its way, hook up with the Communist Party of Great Britain, parentheses, Marxist-Leninists. That would be your home, because that is what the theory does. Now, there's just one last thing. With the collapse of the Soviet Union and the shock of it and the disappointment of it, many people are now wanting to take up what was destroyed and reinvent it, recreate it. Does that make sense? It was a shocking thing, and communist parties all over the world fell like dominoes. So now, 30 years later, or maybe 35 years later, a new generation. We see it in our country, the American Communist Party, the Party of Communists, the PSO, longing for a bygone period. And if we can recreate that moment of the world communist movement, of the Soviet Union, of the alliance of revolutionary forces, under conditions of this crisis, we could be on the doorstep of revolution. Well, you can understand it. You can readily understand it. It is easier to think about the way it was than to think about building what must be, rethinking the world. It is much easier. So, I began to think about, all that we're trying to do and how we're thinking within new eyes about the world, and using the situation of America, the hegemon, the largest imperialist country, the most powerful imperialist nation to ever exist. One set of theories promises absolute certainty. The revolution is 100 years overdue. That's Jody Barr. It was to happen in 1917, and a world revolutionary movement was to take hold. In other words, we're 100 years behind the way things should have gone. And you can imagine, just think about that. If you think about the world through that kind of framework, you've already sabotaged your capacity to know. I don't know how to put it, some other ways I want to put it. Thinking about the world through a lens that is outdated, that's shattered, means that you have literally imprisoned yourself, or put yourself under self-imposed house arrest. I'm going to lock myself down in the past.
Right.
And until you people are awakened to the fact of what could have been. Now, okay, what is possible and what does the world look like in this epoch? It is not the world before the collapse of the Soviet Union and the world communist movement. This is a different world. Does capitalist exploitation still exist as described and defined in Karl Marx's Das Kapital? Yes, pretty much so. Does imperialism, as described by Lenin, or state monopoly capitalism, as described by Lenin, exist? Yes. But not the way they did then. Why is that the case? When Marx wrote, there was no China led by a communist party. There was no realignment of economic, political, and humanity forces opposing imperialism. There will never be a time when imperialism could do in the 21st century what it did in the 19th and 20th century. Even their capacity to wage war is more risky business than it's ever been. Now, therefore, what am I saying? The movement going forward, especially in the United States, will have to take on characteristics and forms of the Black Civil Rights Movement. It's a simple choice for us in the United States. It makes all the sense in the world. We will never return to an unfettered Marxism-Leninism. There has to be some form of a synthesis, at least at the theoretical and ideological level. You cannot just be a Leninist. It's not enough. You cannot just presume that a Leninist Communist Party can be, as they would say, the vanguard of the people. You just can't think it that way. It'll never happen. And I say this having worked for a big part of my life in trying to fulfill and think out and practice the Leninist Party form. No one can convince me that that form can fit this time. I believe that the modality of the Black freedom movement, the way that it positioned the individual and the human being, the ways that it talked about moral responsibility, the ways that it talked about transforming the American nation, and the ways that it understood the central struggle of this time to be the fight for democracy and for the democratic seizure of power by the people. And then we will sort all the rest out. The centrality of democracy, the thing about this idea of the logic of capital, if that is the triggering concept, the logic of capital, this is not new. This goes back to the 19th century. The logic of capital is law without chance, law without the human being. History moves forward without human action, or at least the masses. The principal actors are the ruling elite. Okay? Hence, a pretty much passive and stagnant mass of people requires a vanguard party to bring consciousness to them and to lead them? Well, yes and no. But we can come back to that at another time. But the question of a all humanity movement for peace and democracy, an all humanity movement for peace and democracy, which can blunt the war and anti-democratic proclivities of the ruling elite. A mass movement that I think is readily understood by people at this very moment. The people are at that level of consciousness. There are obstacles ideologically and politically that have to be addressed, but people readily understand the concept of an all humanity movement for peace and democracy. And it rings true to them. It has that strong force of hope and what is realizable in a united struggle of the people. It does not condition the unity of the people upon ideological agreement, but upon a broad moral and revolutionary urge to save humanity and to create new democracies. The concept of all humanity, again, think about it. If you don't know anything, all humanity, wow, I like that. We should all come together. People just in their basic instincts. It also, it transcends many of the, what I would call excesses and inconsistencies of 19th century radical thinking. You know, Marx and Engels and their colleagues were working this out, you know, and they knew they hadn't dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. So it was with Lenin, you know, and just like we do, they were trying to understand the moment using theory and whatever to think about the moment and the transformational possibilities of that moment. But there's a lot of, you know, sharp edges in even the best theory of Marxism, Leninism. But they could not envision a concept, all humanity. But the people can. I don't want to go to war with China. I don't want to be at war with Iran. Why should we try to be the policeman of the whole world? I am part of humanity. My children are part of humanity. And I want the children of Gaza to have what my children have. I don't want them to be all humanity. India, you know, even though Indians find it difficult as Chinese, anybody that's not in the United States, to understand precisely what is happening. But one thing everybody understands, we're all human. We have a common stake in bettering humanity, preventing genocide. So we could talk more about this. I think the concept of the vanguard party is a 19th century concept. It maybe was more or less right for that time is not right for this time. I think as we go forward, as the Saturday Free School, and as we have spoken of ourselves as a world house, we believe that we're all wrapped in a single garment of destiny. We have always put the moral imperative as the central imperative, that you can know all the theory in the world, but without a sense of a moral destiny for all of humanity, without even our developing or helping to develop more concepts that address the issue of morality, of a morality that saves humanity. I think going forward, after we finish the year of Baldwin, we can begin to experiment with these ideas. The relationship of all humanity struggle to knowledge, to the academics, what in modern science should be completely disposed of and what should be embraced. What type of personality, what type of human being should occupy the commanding heights of science? What should universities exist for? Why do we need $1 trillion a year military budget? Why in Philadelphia is the first thing the mayor and the city council do is to pass legislation for a stadium for the basketball team to play in? Why do the people have to pay for this $37 trillion federal debt, which we had nothing to do with? Why should hatred and war be such a prominent part of popular discourse? Why should popular culture be anti-human, sexualizing, demeaning of men and women? Where do questions like sexuality, trans realities, where should all this fit in? We have to, but I think to begin with all humanity, and then to be able to listen to humanity, to hear, that's why I'm so glad, although I don't want you all to go, for y'all to go back to India, so when you get back, you can tell us what Indian people are saying. And I want to know the best, what the Chinese people are saying, what young Chinese people are saying, the ability to listen, because we're all a part of a single garment of destiny. And I think that our theory of a movement does come out of the Black movement, especially the freedom movement of the 60s and 70s. It is the paradigm. You want to do this, you got the framework to do it. I'll stop there. We can work this all out more, but I just want to put it on the table.
When you said it makes a framework, which I think I know what you're talking about.
Yes.
But just as you said, Leninism was not. So tell me what you're thinking when you say the civil rights movement is a framework. Just elaborate on that.
Yes. How would I put it? First of all, I think without being ultimately successful, the civil rights movement changed the country forever. and not just through laws, but change the people. Oh yes. The Vanguard Party, even in its best construed, never thought in terms of transforming people. The way Baldwin talks, the way King talks, one of the things about King, and this is what Baldwin says, that he made the question of civil rights a matter of the heart of every person. When you hear King, you get the sense a person could listen, he really cared about me. He didn't just talk about, he cared about the individual. I was a member of the Communist Party. It's a good thing. No argument about that from me. I don't know, except for a few people, that we had produced a culture where we cared about people. We cared about changing the system, But for us, questions of the moral imperative, morality, were not big questions. You could infer it, but it was not necessary. For King and the Civil Rights Movement, you could not ever conceive of King or the Civil Rights Movement without the great moral challenge to the people. And that's what I think we are today. The other thing, as communists, I felt we were always fighting on our back foot, especially in the United States. We couldn't find a way out. A lot of that had to do with the 1930s and the glorification and romanticization of that period, where there was 100,000 communists and it seemed to be the most active force in the whole country. And in a lot of ways, that's true. But it did not achieve the beginning of the real transformation of the American people that you see with the Civil Rights Movement. Now, we were lucky in the Civil Rights Movement to have Martin Luther King. Ain't many countries had it like that. We were fortunate, and to have that legacy continue today. Or I don't know of many countries that had an intellectual like James Baldwin. I mean, it's just so, or the great music of that period. I mean, a lot of things were working in our favor, and we still have those legacies. Communism and Marxism, Leninism, I feel, when I hear Jody Barr and others, they trivialize too much of the creativity of the people. I don't know that makes sense when I put it that way. They did not, first of all, they wouldn't know how to celebrate a James Baldwin. He would be seen as I don't know how they would, or Martin Luther King, or whatever. They just, in their ideological framework, they don't have a way to do it. You can get locked in, and then you make every kind of mistake possible, especially on questions of whiteness and white supremacy, while claiming to fight racism. And you locked into one way of thinking, the class conflict, the class struggle. And how do you address a nation which has not yet fulfilled its promise to what is now 40 million of its citizens? Well, the class struggle, socialism. That's my answer. No, you got to address this man and woman, this child in North Philadelphia. Like the Bible says, James 1, how can you claim to love God who you don't see and don't love the person you see every day? That it says it more eloquently than that. How can you claim to love socialism, which you can only imagine, and not love that child that you see every day, and thus see and conceptualize the world through that child's plight? What do we do for them? And that was the weakness. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk to you.
Well, I also want to take a shot at your question because it took me a long time to understand King, but I remember Doc one time said about King that he was almost a founding father of America, you know, of a new nation, you know, elevating himself to a founding father, and you know, to compare, you know, America to Britain or France, I really don't like France. I really don't like Britishers. I'll tell you why. And Jyoti is cool because she's half Indian, so I just want to get that on there.
Right.
But you know, so there's a lot in France or in Britain. I think that non-Britishers, non-white Britishers, or non-white French people have a hard time integrating. And you know, there's a lot of talk about the French soccer team because it's mostly African. And so, you know, they'll say, oh, I mean, there's this one French football player. He said, "Oh, when I score a goal, I'm France. When we lose, I'm African." Or you know, when they're playing in the football, but so obviously it's pop culture, so I see this stuff coming out of Europe. But there's no pathway, and you know, the thing about the other thing I don't like about Britain and France is I think they treat their Muslim populations pretty poorly, and I think that when you go to Europe, Europeans think that Americans are racist, but they never had the civil rights movement.
Right.
So here in America, if you're racist in public, people will tell you to shut up. Like that's not. I don't care. Do that in your own home. Don't do that in public. Even racists know it's not appropriate to be racist. So you'll talk to a white supremacist. He's, I don't hate black people. I just love white people. And they say this. And but you know, in France they don't have anything like that. So or in Britain, you know, my experiences in Britain, you'll have people say blatantly racist things and think nothing of it.
Right.
And because they didn't have that repudiation.
Right.
And then it's created a problem in society where British Muslims are some of the most extreme people I've ever you know, heard of. And they say things in Britain in the mosque that you would never say in Saudi Arabia or Pakistan. And you know, like I'm not even gonna get into it. Like sectarian stuff, just ultra religious stuff. It's just like, come on, man. Like, you know, they're more. I'm not gonna get into it. There's something wrong with Britain and France where you know, in America anybody can become American. In Britain and France, there's this idea you can't become a British, you can't become French unless you're, you know, white or indigenous to Britain or whatever. And I think that's what the civil rights movement has given to America. And it gives us an advantage. You know, we're talking about this world humanity struggle. It gives us an advantage. It's like that's why it's
advantage. Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's why it's that's why we're a step forward. You know, that's why we call the civil rights movement a revolution.
Well, I think what you're pointing to is the different histories of the country. Now,
Yes.
for example, I know nothing. The only country I know is this. My history goes back. I can go to Civil War, relative. I can go back. And so the histories of these countries are different. And America is the paradigm for race in the world. I think that's what you're pointing to, because they look to us. And
that's right.
You know, like our culture,
I agree with that.
We made, I mean, black people made country, white people, you know, we were here since the beginning.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a reason
And I think,
for that difference. And,
yeah.
and they are looking to us
Mhm.
as a
Mhm.
And I wanted to add something about Gerald Horne, because Gerald Horne never says anything about Martin Luther King. And I think he also said, it's not workers of the world unite, it's Africans of the world unite. So, I think that his view of the world is more similar to an African in France, where it's just we are separate from white people. That's that Afrocentricity.
Interesting.
Whereas if you go to an African American in America, I think that they overlap a lot with white Americans. That more so than if you go to those countries. When I went to Britain, it was so segregated. Poles live with Poles, Africans live with Africans. Indians, not just segregated by the Indians are all together, but the different ethnicities in India are separated. Whereas, like my grandmother, I'm hanging out with the Bengalis. I know Pakistanis here in America, but in London, it's all the Punjabis are together. They don't interact with South Indians or anything like that. It's just, and they call it in Britain multiculturalism, which is and it's just a problem in its society. Nobody likes it, and that's the Gerald Horne thing of like, oh well, you'd be better off in Africa. That's separation.
I also wanted to, because I think this question has come up in free school also before, especially when we take like a historic view of Marxism and then say, okay, it was this revolutionary movement and it was in some ways its, appeal to peace was one of the the most compelling or strong cases that could be made for it to be a revolutionary theory that like spread over the world like it did. But this question keeps coming up is, oh, okay, so you want to replace Marxism with something new, or like you want to replace Marxism with the civil rights movement. Is that what we are trying to say? And I guess to some extent that is what we are trying to say, but it's not a simplistic assertion, which is that, oh, like they're comparable. I think they're not comparable. And the fact that they're not comparable has actually been shown by the evidence of what has happened to American society in the last, I don't know how many 100 years. It's even what we say about the liberal consensus, or what the thing that we've been trying to discuss, the crisis of the individual or the human being in Western society. If you basically try and assess a theory in terms of its strength or its ability to address very concrete questions, I think that's what like tells you that, okay, this theory wins the future or this theory doesn't. Because I've heard this, like I've thought about this so many times, because this is obviously something that comes up a lot, because they'll be like, oh, you want to move from, if Marxism is class reductionist, you guys are being to race reductionist and this and that, right? And it is important to think about these, like, questions and criticisms, because you need to be able to defend what you're saying. And honestly, like the other thing they'll tell you is, just like the civil rights movement was incomplete, the project of the Soviet Union was also incomplete, because it collapsed because of its internal betrayal by somebody like Gorbachev collaborating with the West. But I just wanted to make that distinction, that although the historical conditions or the fate of some of these movements might have been similar, might have involved betrayal of a white ruling class going against the grain of what the people were moving towards, they're not comparable on the basis of the crisis that actually needs to be addressed.
Well, I've also, when you were saying that, you have to look at that child, you have to think about him and what this child needs, and socialism cannot answer that. Well, I've heard people say, well, no, socialism can answer that, right? And they'll say that.
Well, let me just say this. It is, when the person talks about the logic of capital, one has decided that economic analysis is the essence of social scientific understanding. Yes, socialism might be able, well, I would say would relieve the suffering of that child. The Chinese model shows that it can eliminate poverty. But then the question is, how do you get from here to there? And that's where I think we have had it right. There must be a seizure power by the people. Democracy creates the conditions for a different type of economy and different priorities, but it requires this broad movement. You know, can I just, I hated to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
A broad movement that we communists were never able to fully realize or understand, you know, and even in the talk of unity, it was always the idea that you would need a communist party to affect that, to bring that into existence. Just one person I would just draw your attention to, an Indian communist named Arpam Dutt, who wrote a famous book called Fascism and Social Revolution. And it reminds me very much of Jody Barr and her party. I'm certain they know Arpam Dutt. He was a Britisher and an Indian. And but Arpam Dutt was wrong, and it was the same mistake that they would make, the Indian communists, or most of them would make in the freedom movement of India, you know. And were it not for the likes of Henry Winston and other African American communists in this country, the Communist Party here would have made the same mistake, finding everything wrong with the civil rights movement, religion is the opiate of the people, and yada yada, all of that back and forth. But yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I agree with that. Because I was reading this, I think I sent you this article that came out in the New York Times that said that, okay, it was titled very provocatively. It was titled, "It has been and is and always will be about the economy."
Oh, yes, James Baldwin.
Yeah.
And, you know, after like a month, more than a month of the elections, and after analyzing all of this data, all going back to, like, I read it as a desperate attempt to sort of remove focus from the fact that this was a moral decision.
Yeah.
That people are affected by their material conditions, and that is the only thing that moves
Absolutely.
them.
Absolutely.
False narratives.
Absolutely. And every economic worldview or theory does the same thing. I don't care whether it's Marxism or Adam Smith or John Maynard. Every set of theories based upon economic determinism does the same thing, and thus demeans the human being, accepting the idea of this narrow, rational individual.
Right.
They all do it. They all, and I mean, it's the most frustrating thing in the world, because anybody that knows a human being knows that they don't act like that.
Right.
And what is uppermost most of the time are moral questions of what is right and wrong all the time. And it's, well, I'm sorry.
No, maybe you can tell me if I'm thinking about this correctly, because this is something that I was thinking about recently, is that you've read that homelessness increased by so much,
18%.
18% this year. A complete like indictment of this society, of this country that is the
Absolutely.
richest in the world.
Absolutely.
And I've been thinking that if so many people are homeless, hungry, poor,
Yeah. Yeah.
they would all be like just like rioting on the streets. They would
If
be,
it were just the
if
economic.
it would just be economic. They would be rioting on the streets. They would be killing people left and right because they want their material needs to be met. They
Right.
they don't know where their next meal is going to
Right.
come from. And if that is the only thing that motivates them, then they would be, engaging in senseless violence. But no, they want a moral way to get to
That's
the next
right.
stage.
Or you could reverse it, which is take someone like Luigi or the Penn students, who, in terms of economics, they're supposed to be the elites, right?
Right.
Like Luigi went to a private school, like went to an Ivy League. Why is it that he wasn't like, oh, like I have it all, let me move on with my life? Why is it that all the students who are protesting what's happening in Gaza, not just like, oh, this is, I got my bread, like I'm gonna be set up for an internship at JP Morgan, I'm gonna make lots of money, I'm gonna like whatever. Instead, there's always that moral element, which is like, I feel like what Du Bois defined as like chance. Like he always has a thing where he's like, he had the thing where he was like, I define sociology as like the study of like how much chance is involved in human action. Like that chance, like there is such thing as law, but like there must be chance.
Yeah. And you know, what you said in your opening statement, Emily, I wrote it down. You said something is not just a crisis of capitalism, but now.
Of knowledge. You said of knowledge.
She said, yeah, knowledge. And it's and the things that I hear is that America is like in a spiritual, I mean, I'm not talking about religious sense, but you know what I mean? We talk about knowledge, there's a spiritual vacuum. And, you know, we were talking about unhappiness of PhD students. And I think you're on to something here. That's something new that needs to be talked about.
Yeah.
I see it. You know, that vacuum. Even there was an article that in the New York Times was talking about the Indians, how they what's the guy, Ramaswamy, talking about how they achieved, but he's talking about how, you know, they're the model, the Indians are the model of minority. But he said there's a spiritual thing to pay for, because say a kid who grows up Indian, the parents always tell him, don't go into the arts, you know, he's talking about. And so, you know, don't go get a job. And so they come to America and they identify with that lifestyle, as you both say, whiteness, you know, making it. But there's that vacuum. And also, there's blacks too. So there's something to what you definitely talking about that's missing. And that's that would be the new human movement. That's the idea that's going to come out. I think those are the contradictions that are coming out.
Does it resonate, this concept of all humanity movement? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, yes, it does, because as you and I both know, when we were in college, our idea of civil rights movement was not what we see now. We weren't moving for Kanye West, or that's not what I, you know, what we were talking, you know, was young men, you know, back then. And so the contradictions are coming out, you know, like P. Diddy getting in trouble. We talk about that, and so in these images that young blacks have, you know, basketball players or rappers, that's becoming, you know, they're looking down. I hope so. So yeah, so that's why I think that there's a new movement, and I always say this: you guys' your presence here, because when we were in college, we were not having these conversations about, you know, and so it's sort of like I said, it's the concrete realization of change. You know, like you know, we didn't have no American Chinese students. They were, you know, your parents probably just came in 1965, probably. After that, you know, I do a thing in my class at John Day. I might say, well, how many of your parents came here? I might be the only one. Now, I'm in New York City. I might be the only one who's and America, America. But all of them came
Yeah.
after 1965, 56. And so that's the change, like you can see the change in America. And America is actually, it's a heterogeneous country. And that heteronomy makes for a difference in terms of, that's what's going on. The whole continent is shifting.
I want to add one observation to this question of focus on the economics. It reminded me of a conversation I had in office. I can't even remember when, sometime, with my coworkers, where I feel like this emphasis on economics is, I'm starting to see it as one of the failures in the process of working out the basis of Western civilization, starting from the industrial revolution. Like it wasn't fully worked out because, okay, this is not even fully related. I tried to connect it, but we were having this discussion. A lot of people went home for holidays and then came back. So my coworker who's from Chile was telling me that he thinks among the South American countries, Chile is very Western, like it has accepted Western values. And so we had this whole conversation about, oh, that seems to me like South Korea like, and then, we had a deep discussion where I was asking him, because I happen to know a little bit of the history because of Allende and, the coup and so on and so forth, copper, which by the way was not expected that I would know any of this. But because I knew he was willing to talk to me and even entertain questions that would have been dismissed otherwise. But he was saying that, oh, like I was trying to understand what Chile's then interrelationship with other South American countries would be. And then the main question became, what do we even see as Westernized or Western culture? And actually, honestly, I thought people would be talking about like this was put out to the whole group of people who are from different races, like Iran, all sorts of, no Americans, by the way, but that's the physics department at UPenn. But it was thrown open, and everybody was like sort of trying to ask themselves what represents Western culture or Westernization to them. And I expected it to be all about science and rational thinking and individual freedom. But most of them, in fact, maybe each and every one of them talked about the economic motive and said what we identify as Western culture is prosperity. And this person, my coworker who's from Chile, I mean, he was saying that they were Western because they have like, if not similar, or at least the possibility of having as prosperous a society, because he was like, you can buy everything in Chile that you can buy in the United States, and so on. Anyway, I just bring this up because it surprised me, because in a room full of scientists who are talking about what makes the West and what does Westernization mean, I expected it to be about rationality and democracy and but it comes down to prosperity. That's what is seen as the most Western trait. And I've just been thinking about this a lot, and I really feel like this is the result of an incompleteness in the working out of, okay, so we have the modern world.
And the working out of.
That's why I'm saying that, we have the modern industrial world.
Right.
You start with enlightenment, you have this Renaissance, then you have the industrial movement, revolution. But then, there are several questions that are put on the table. Then is, what does this mean for the human being? What does this mean for values? What does this mean for, yes, also the economy? Right. But there has been an incompleteness where one side of it was in some ways over-determinative in what would become the, and anyway, I just see what this conversation reminded me.
They've cultivated experts in the economy, but they have not cultivated experts in morality.
No question. But is that not the Achilles heel?
Yeah,
Right.
Because in a certain way, a discourse on what is right and wrong would immediately draw attention to poverty. But a discourse on prosperity is blind to poverty.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Because then it becomes a matter of my prosperity. And I have nothing to do with them, and that's their problem. this is I think, and this, this is the ideological essence of the fight for humanity. And it's almost simple. It's in every religion. It's in every, ancient philosophical system. Platonic theory of the state, Confucianist theory of the state. What are they about? It is the moral responsibility of the leader of society to act in ethical ways, and that for people in society to act ethically towards one another, and okay, it existed side by side with a dynasty and landlordism and poverty. But it is a difference between that way of thinking about society and the state and this economic determinism, be it on the liberal side of the individual's prosperity or on the Marxist side of all questions are decided at the level of economics. And out of the economic conflict emerges consciousness, but it is a cold theory. It does not have, when you put that side by side with, let us say, King's speeches, it is about humanity. The Marxist theory is about class interest. Always. You can't get to humanity. You cannot do it through the framework, through the reasoning process. And that's what I meant by it's 19th century, but still very crude, not sophisticated, and is blind to so much. Even in the 19th century, they didn't understand Asia. Marx talked about the Asian mode of production. What the fuck is that? Or they were seen as pre-modern. And that the trajectory of history would be to westernize and to modernize in that respect. And that baggage remains. I hate to say it, I mean, I'm telling you, as a part of all of this, not that I had abandoned my own upbringing, but I can understand the distance between so many communists and ordinary people. They don't have a way to talk to them. Let me shut up.
Reminisce.
Well, reminiscing and reflecting, meditating. Something that I was a part of, but was both a strength and many weaknesses. And now we have to move beyond that.
Right.
We really do.
Well, because actually what you said was clarifying when you said we need to recognize that the world today is not the world before the Soviet Union collapsed.
Yes.
Actually, that was, for some reason, that really clicked with me because even let's just take China, for example. China, which has achieved a lot of good, at the same time, you could argue that unresolved questions in China that have to do with human beings, let's just take the best example of a category of human beings, which is the youth, teenagers, the youth, adolescents in China, that ironically in China, or even let's say India, that there are certain human questions that are not solvable by just let's say a communist program. There's nothing wrong with communism, but that there are human questions that are unsolvable by communism itself, Marxism, Leninism, but that in fact, ironically, require China that its own ancient philosophy, right? Which isn't which is different than calling whatever the certain connotation pre-modern, but there are certain concepts that already are in China's civilizational history and thinking like it's large, vast thinking, which I'm not even the most familiar with, whether it's Confucianism, Buddhism, many different schools of thought, Taoism, and its art, that in some ways also bring you much closer to Black philosophy, the African American struggle, Baldwin, Du Bois, that actually it's that part of China's history that needs to be brought back to help solve human questions today that have not been completely solved by communism, which doesn't mean like, which is not, has nothing to say about the state itself. Like, we're not talking about China being like, oh, they shouldn't have a communist party or whatever. It's about human questions that world humanity in the time of modernity must resolve, that like Baldwin and Du Bois like get at in such a crystallized way. Or you could say Tagore, in some ways Tagore talked about in India, about like we should not abandon what we have in India for the idea of Western modernity, as if what we have does not contribute towards the same necessity for modernity. Oh yeah, and I just wanted to add in that the other thing that really made sense to me about this all humanity thing is like the concept of an all humanity movement rather than like class struggle, is like an all humanity movement for peace and democracy, is when you said when you said it's a unity of the people, not dependent upon like ideological agreement, strict ideological agreement, but actually most importantly is predicated upon like a overwhelming moral and revolutionary urge to free humanity and create democracy. The reason why I liked that phrasing is because even going back to the China conference, I actually think it's something we talked a lot about but didn't completely understand, which is to celebrate the Communist Party of China, 100 years of the Communist Party of China, and what the Chinese people have achieved on this long march, a long march towards achieving like something for the Chinese people, is we talked a lot about how that the right framework in this time is not communism, or let's even say socialism versus capitalism, and thus like China versus the West, China versus the US, but it is about humanity versus war. And I don't know, it's kind of deep because in some ways that helps describe a very unifying understanding of what humanity has yet to achieve in this specific epoch. Like this impulse, an all humanity movement based upon that all humanity, like all humanity urge to understand like basically the moral imperative. And like
common thread, the common thread that unites us. You know, that's the task, humanity's task at this moment. And yeah.
And it also helps describe why, like, we said this in Band on Reading Group once, but we talked about how like, we were reading King's Pilgrimage to Nonviolence, and you can read that 20,000 times and still get something new. Because we were talking about how, isn't it interesting that American exceptionalism, the whole point of American exceptionalism is the idea that we can be something without the world. Even though ironically, America's position in the world is dependent upon an empire that subjugates the world, right? It's this interesting, like, what like Baldwin talks about is like the white paradox, this white paradox, where you're like, I'm special because I'm like above and separate from everyone, but at the same time, I need everyone. I also need everyone and everything to be and insist that they're below me so that I have an identity. And but the one root, it's like the one root in America that gives America hope is that, and potential is that it is African Americans in particular who are always, you know, the way Du Bois is like, they were everything African, but forcefully enslaved and brought here. And for generations are basically the only real Americans, forged through struggle, are the only real Americans who've defined what American life should be about. And it's kind of funny because like
forged in struggle.
Yeah, forged in identity, forged in struggle, and like we talked about how interesting it is that like King's pilgrimage to nonviolence is actually in some ways King's pilgrimage to Asia, to find Gandhi, or King's pilgrimage to humanity. Where King is like, it's not weird at all for him to be like, oh, a Gandhi, Asia, like, and let me bring it back to inject humanity back into this dying civilization, or the way that Coltrane and all the jazz musicians, like some of them went to China, some of them went to India, but it's about this aspect of like, we are one, like humanity, like there's nothing separating. Like for me to be an African American is for me to be an essential part of humanity.
Yes.
And it's like it's a constant pilgrimage to refine humanity in yourself, which is to find the world, to be part of the world. There's one other example I wanted to give that was really deep. Or like the muralists, like the Black muralists, Jacob Lawrence, Charles White. They were like, they received us, they were looking for a certain form that they found in the Mexican muralists. And it's always about, where can I look in the world for like, where can I look in the world for a spirit that resonates and can bring this even like forward? Like where's the world fountain of knowledge that I can grab?
The fountain of knowledge, no matter where it is. And that is the spirit. I mean, Winston said it, but that is the spirit that animates the Black movement, especially that civil rights movement. But yes, it is the gift to humanity. It's not just a Black thing. That is a gift to humanity. And you're very right. To take Gandhi from India and make him ours. Explain that.
Yeah.
Make him ours, a part of the Black struggle. See, this is something that we cannot lose. And, you know, the ruling class wants to beat all of that out of us, to make us ashamed of King. They do. There are a lot of Black people based on Afrocentrism, so-called revolutionary nationalism, so-called whatever, who have attacked King so much that many people are ashamed of King.
Right. Oh yeah, my other example is the Nation of Islam.
Yes.
Because you kind of can't get any more Black than the Nation of Islam, who says like white people aren't allowed to come to our service. And their whole concept is, it's such a natural concept of, we are Afro-Asian, like we are the Asiatic Black man. Like Black, and it's so interesting, right? That it's like their concept of self, or like, let's just even say their concept of Blackness is that we're Asiatic Black men, that we're original people, that we come, in fact, contrary to what people insist upon, we are actually like, we are like humanity, like we are like the world in one soul. Like, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. It's so not foreign, this concept of there's something called humanity, which puts you with the world, and then there's white supremacy. Like, it's humanity, white supremacy, humanity or war, and it's both a revolutionary and a deeply moral.
And
like
it makes the people an integral part of their own liberation. It's not, you know, and this again was a serious mistake, and that everybody didn't agree with it. You know, there were different levels of dogmatism. But the idea that the people can only liberate themselves if they have a vanguard party, that's false. That's wrong. You know, it's wrong. But, you know, you get people who are desperate and return to that kind of dogma. There is no grounds for it. If it in Russia, okay, you want to say that. In the United States, the most powerful imperialist country, the most warlike. In other words, a theory that fits this can be a great gift to humanity by turning American imperialism into a paper tiger. That's why it's so important to get this right. You know,
Yes.
Well, we do have, I just want to read a few comments. And then
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Because I think the comments are actually, there's a lot of disagreements. I think it's important to
Okay.
read, which is, okay, well, responding to, immediately to the all humanity, the concept of an all humanity struggle or movement, Matt says, oh wait. Okay, well, so Bambalai actually says, Bambalai says, Joe thinks Jyoti is great, and I think you should check out Jyoti, y'all. And Matt
Who
says,
is that? Check it.
Bambalai likes Jyoti.
Oh, Joe, okay.
And
I'm
then
sorry.
Matt says, Doc, Alexander McKay is a colleague of Jyoti Brar, and Alex sometimes has compelling Marxist-Leninist analysis on his YouTube channel, Marx, Lenin, Engels, Institute. And then Matt also says, there is this vast mountain range of humanity, and it is true that the mountains are made of granite, the working class. But to reduce the magnificent mountains, humanity, to its lowest common denominator, though accurate and important, is far too limited. I think I'm a little confused by that metaphor. Okay, this person kind of has a long disagreement. I don't know, their username is a bunch of characters. They say, the people of India and China understand what is happening in Gaza to a surprising degree. I'm not sure why this. Replace Marxism with the civil rights movement. Holy moly, just read Adam Smith. Just read Adam Smith. The people of Gaza are being bombed due to the material situation of political economy, rather than some vague moral imposition. The Auto Workers Union represents firms that directly feed into steel manufacturing and milling for military-grade vehicles and artillery munitions. This is a material concern about why the people working there must do so from desperation rather than hatred of Palestinians, which is a moral disposition. This exact issue is what makes Doc's ideas so unfortunately vacuous.
So unfortunately, what?
Vacuous.
Vacuous.
He says, and then other people had chimed in to this with their own thoughts, where Matt says, religion as opiate of the people, though, as I understand it, is a misunderstanding of Marx. And says the way opiate of the people is commonly presented is misrepresenting what Marx was expressing. Alexander says, morality is shaped by people's experience. It's malleable. False consciousness is, of course, pushed by those who own media. But Matt chimes in and says, how do we become fully human? Western society ignores the most real question. Saying that how do we become fully human is the most real question. And then BK says standards of morality need to be agreed upon. And this, the person with the characters in their name says they really don't need to be agreed upon. That's what he says. And says standards of ethics need to be agreed upon. So like the difference between morality and ethics. How one personally gets to being a decent human being is one's own business. Interesting. BK says, well, what is the difference? The person replies, moral is from a Greek word mora, meaning more or less footing. How one views the world personally from one's position. Ethics is concerned with the externalization of these morals. BK says, okay, ethics then. This person says, in the process of standardizing the ethos. BK says, I was using the dictionary definition of ethics, American heritage. This goes back to the point of standards. Person replies and says, if one works for a joint munitions facility to produce weaponry, one's direct product is technically ethical, yet likely immoral. Economic determinism is made so due to political economy. Colin says, I think many people think that because economic determinism is a pretty good or narrow theory for electoral politics, that it is general. I think all these realists or geopolitical analysts are basically the same. They only talk about interests of some agent. And then, okay, so now Colin's getting in a discussion with the person who has characters in their name. I don't know how to pronounce it. The real, as in realpolitik, is from the sense of realm or real estate, which is a reference to the domination of land for profit. Alexander says, a discussion of power to change anything requires understanding what interests own media, militarism, money. Of course, there are downstream and natural influences on individuals. And then the other person with the characters in the name says, this is the critical concern of politics or the arrangement of the city. Colin says, I see these people claim that China-US competition will drive history, but this theory ignores the collapse of the West. Alexander says, Gramsci turn in real time here. I appreciate the creative thinking and how most people communicate in the real world. There's room for both materialist and spiritual sensibilities. And then Michelle Bell chimed in a little earlier and said, as American discourse continues about how to heal our economical and institutional systems, it is critical that American descendants of slaves be distinguished from Black immigrants in America, which we agree with. But I think we'll continue this discussion of an all humanity movement
Oh, yeah.
to answer the
We'll
question.
flesh this
We'll
out
flesh it
more.
out.
Yeah.
And yeah, so, okay, well, we'll continue this next week. So we thank all our commenters and stay warm. Okay, bye.
Bye.